The night the rat didn't run. The shack is rotten wood and held breath. Floorboards groan, dust hangs in the air, and 6 wands are pointed at one trembling man. Peter Pettigrew is on his knees, sobbing, his thin hair plastered to his skull with sweat. Harry's heart is pounding so hard it hurts. Ron is white with pain. Hermione is pressed against the wall, staring. Sirius and Remus close in. This is the moment. The night everything changed. In canon, it slips. A flash of one light, a scream, a burst of panic as Snape crashes back into the room and the full moon rises. One heartbeat of chaos, one coward's desperate spell, and the rat is gone, scurrying into the tunnel, out into the forbidden forest, back into the shadows of a coming war. But what if, in that same heartbeat, someone moved faster than fear, faster than fate, and the most dangerous coward in the wizarding world never makes it to the tunnel at all? Sirius Black lunges, not at Snape, not at Remus, but at Peter. His hand is on Pettigrew's wrist before the wand can swing. Bone grinds. Peter screamed. The spell he was forming dies on his tongue. Remus is there an instant later, years of grief and suspicion burning out into something cold and precise as his wand presses under Peter's jaw. The shack falls into a ringing silence. No rat. No escape. No second chance. In that splintered room, a choice is made that should have rewritten the Second Wizarding War. Because what if Pettigrew doesn't vanish into legend and rumour, but into chains and Veritaserum? What if, instead of a missing witness and a madman in Azkaban, the Ministry is forced to stare at a living traitor and hear under oath what really happened in Godric's Hollow? What if the story of that Halloween night is dragged into the light so brutally it cuts through the grief like a knife? This is that story. The story of a boy who does not go back to the cupboard under the stairs, counting the days until Hogwarts in the dark. The story of a boy who walks out of the Shrieking Shack under the protection of 2 broken marauders who refuse to lose another child to silence and neglect. Harry Potter, not returned to Privet Drive but claimed. Harry Potter taken into a house that smells of smoke and old magic, where Sirius Black is not a fugitive but a godfather, and Remus Lupin is not a passing professor but a constant, steady presence. Imagine the contrast. A world where the Ministry cannot pretend Sirius is guilty, where Dumbledore cannot quietly send Harry back to Petunia because the blood wards are convenient, where the truth of Peter Pettigrew's betrayal is on record, his confession a spell-locked memory anyone can see. From a single spell in a dusty shack comes a different war, different allies, a different Harry. A Harry raised on dueling drills instead of Dudley's fists. A Harry who grows up loved, listened to, and terrifyingly prepared. So what happens when that Harry and the girl who will stand beside him finally step into Hogwarts? That's where we're going next. What if the scariest rat in fiction never got away? The chamber is open and full of whispers. Not the Chamber of Secrets. The Shrieking Shack. The night everything changed and then, in this version, changed again. Wands raised, breath held. One small, shaking man pinned under 3 sets of eyes that have already lost too much. In canon, he runs. In canon, he screams, transforms, and vanishes into the dark, and the scariest rat in fiction scurries straight back to his dead master. But what if he didn't? What if the spell that bound him held? What if the truth of Godric's Hollow didn't slip through Harry's fingers and into the trees? What if Peter Pettigrew never reached Voldemort at all? From that single choice, the story fractures. No broken-legged escape. No servant to carry a frail, half-alive thing through the forests of Albania. No hand offered over a cauldron in a graveyard. Voldemort's resurrection ritual, the one that depends on Wormtail's loyalty and fear, stalls in the dark. The war doesn't end, but it hesitates. It waits, and in the space of that hesitation, something else happens. What if Sirius Black is cleared in Harry's 3rd year, not posthumously, not too late, but now? What if the spell-locked memory of that night, the Veritaserum confession, cuts through the grief like a knife in a crowded courtroom, forcing the Ministry to stare at what it did to an innocent man? Fudge blusters, Dumbledore manoeuvres, the Wizengamot whispers, but the rat cannot lie under truth potion. The spell holds. The story changes. Then the question that matters most. What if Harry never goes back to the Dursleys again? Canon Harry is a child of cupboards and locked cat flaps, underfed, unwanted. He measures his worth in chores completed and punishments avoided. He flinches at raised voices. He hoards food. He walks into every year at Hogwarts already in survival mode, waiting for the next blow, the next dead body, the next spell he'll have to cast without enough sleep or context. But in this timeline, Harry walks out of that trial and into a different home. Grimmauld Place reclaimed. Or a smaller house first, while the black ancestral madness is scrubbed from the walls. Sirius, still raw and reckless. Remus, scarred and careful. Two men who have buried the same friends and refuse to fail their son. This is that story. An AU where Harry grows up with battle-scarred guardians who pour everything they have into him. Where animagus theory is not a forbidden secret, but a lesson at the kitchen table, sketched in ink and chocolate frog wrappers. Where the Marauders aren't half-whispered legends, but flesh and blood memories told by the men who lived them, including the parts that went wrong. He learns that he is wanted before he learns that he is famous. He learns he is dangerous before the war tries to use him. He hears about Horcruxes and prophecies as conversations, not weapons sprung on him in the 11th hour. The loneliness that defined canon Harry is replaced by something sharper. A found family so formidable that the entire shape of the coming war bends around them. Because this isn't just about saving Sirius from Azkaban. It's about what happens when Harry Potter enters Hogwarts already trained to question authority, already fluent in dueling stances, already certain that if the world turns on him, he has a home that will not. In this video, we'll trace that altered path, starting in the Shrieking Shack, through school years where the Troll, the Basilisk, the Tournament, even the Ministry itself, all meet a different Harry. We'll ask again and again, without Pettigrew, does Voldemort ever truly return? And if he does, what does the final battle look like when the boy who lived never had to face the dark alone? Rewinding the war. Before the rat. Before the shack. To feel how massive that change is, the story has to rewind. Back before the shack. Before the rat. Before the Second War even had a chance to begin. First War. 4 boys in Gryffindor robes, laughing in corridors, turning into animals under the full moon. James, Sirius, Remus, Peter. The Marauders believed they were unbreakable, a family forged in pranks and midnight runs. Then the war cut through the grief like a knife. Friends, dead. Orders whispered. Voldemort hunting a baby because of a prophecy none of them had heard in full. The Fidelius charm was supposed to be their shield. One spell. One secret keeper, one unbreakable hiding place in Godric's Hollow. Everyone assumed it would be Sirius. Of course, it would be Sirius. But what if fear and strategy twisted that obvious choice? What if James and Lily, desperate and exhausted, let Sirius convince them Peter was the safer option, the unexpected choice no one would suspect? That choice is the hinge of the entire war. Peter took the secret. Peter walked out of Godric's Hollow. And on the night everything changed, Voldemort walked in. Canon plays out in seconds. The front door blasted apart. James dead in the hall, wand still in his hand. Lily screaming upstairs, then silence. Then a green spell that should have ended everything. Instead, it rebounded, left a Dark Lord half alive and a baby with a scar. By morning, Godric's Hollow was ruins and Harry Potter was an orphan. Pettigrew didn't just run, he staged a street of corpses. 1 explosion, 12 muggles dead, and a severed finger left behind. He screamed accusations at Sirius, then vanished into the sewers as a rat. The Ministry wrote the story in blood and rubble. Sirius Black. Mass murderer. Peter Pettigrew. Dead hero. The fallout was total. Sirius went to Azkaban without trial. Remus stared at the prophet and believed the worst thing about his best friend. Dumbledore placed Harry with the Dursleys, building blood wards out of Petunia's reluctant protection. Harry's childhood became a cupboard, not a cradle. This is that story the books gave us. A boy who survived the war but grew up with nothing. Legally, Peter is the missing piece. He is the only living witness who can stand in a Wizengamot chamber and say, under Veritaserum, that Sirius never betrayed the Potters, that Voldemort was invited in by a different coward. Magically, his testimony locks the timeline of that Halloween night into something the Ministry cannot ignore, and that's why the Shrieking Shack matters. 12 years of injustice, of Remus's isolation, of Sirius's imprisonment, of Harry's exile to Privet Drive all converge in that rotting house. Wands out. Doors barred. A boy, a werewolf, a convict, a professor, and a rat, all trapped with the truth. We are back in that present now. The spells have been cast, the lies stripped away, and everyone is staring at Pettigrew. His paws twitch, his eyes dart to the door. He is about to run, or he is not. What happens to the war if the rat never escapes this room? The split second that splits the timeline. The room explodes before anyone can breathe. Snape's cloak snaps against the doorframe as he barges in, wand already raised, voice a raw snarl. Expelliarmus! The spell cracks through the air. Harry's wand flies. Sirius lunges. Hermione screams. Ron clutches his useless leg. For a heartbeat, it is canon again. Chaos. Red and blue light slashing across the rotting boards. Sirius and Snape circling each other, old hatred burning hotter than the dust-choked air. Harry shouting that Sirius is innocent, that Peter is alive. Snape shouting back that he's heard enough. The war and all its grief pressed into one cramped shack where no one is listening. On the bed, the rat trembles. Remus feels it before he sees it. The wolf in him, battle-honed, does not care about schoolboy grudges or ministry procedure. It cares about movement, prey, escape. Peter's paws twitch again, a fraction too deliberate, black eyes flicking to the tunnel that leads back to Hogwarts and the forest and freedom. In the original story, this is the moment everything slips. The night everything changed for Sirius, for Harry, for Voldemort, because a single rat ran and no one caught him. What if that choice goes differently? Remus has been waiting for it. All night, through confession and accusation and tears, through the way Sirius's voice kept breaking on James's name, he has held one spell at the edge of his mind, steady and cold. The Marauders were reckless, but they were not stupid. They spent years hiding an illegal animagus in a school full of professors and dark detectors. Of course they built contingencies. Of course they crafted magic for this. Peter's spine ripples. Bones begin to fold. Fingers shrivel, nails hardening into claws. Fur sprouts along his jaw as his face collapses inward. The air hums with the wrongness of a body, trying to become something smaller. Remus moves. Revelio animeus, vincula muris. His voice is low, but it cuts through the grief like a knife. Two spells woven together, old marauder work sharpened by war. One to drag the truth of a shifting body into the open. One tailored for a rat. Light slams into Peter mid-change. He jerks, mouth opening in a silent scream. Flesh crawls. Bones half shrink and then stop. One arm is human, fingers splayed, knuckles white. The other is a twisted limb of grey fur and pink scrabbling toes. His face is a nightmare. One human eye rolling in terror. One beady and black. Whiskers frozen in mid-sprout. Then stillness. Absolute, awful stillness. He hangs there on the bed, suspended between man and animal, every line of him locked. The shack falls into a ringing silence. Even Snape stops, wand hanging uselessly at his side as he stares. There is no denying it now. Not a clever story. Not a boy's wild accusation. A living, breathing confession carved into Peter's own body. The only surviving witness to Godric's Hollow, caught in the act of becoming the rat who framed Sirius Black. This is that story. Because with Wormtail immobilized in front of Harry, Hermione, Ron, Snape, Sirius and a war-torn Remus Lupin, the future just veered off its tracks. No escape to Albania. No quiet years to find his master's scattered soul. No loyal servant to brew the potion that will give Voldemort back his body and his war. One prepared spell, one refused escape. One choice that means Sirius might walk free. Harry might go home to someone who loves him, and the Dark Lord might never rise the same way again. But the shack is not safe yet. Snape's eyes narrow. His wand lifts, and the question becomes, now that the rat is caught, who will decide what happens to him? Sirius, Remus, and the war behind their eyes. Sirius's wand hand shakes. Not from fear. From 12 years of Azkaban rage slamming into the sight of Peter on the floor, curled in on himself, hands over his head, whimpering. This is the man who blew a street apart. This is the man who framed him, who sold James and Lily. And now he's here, breathing, begging. Look at me, Sirius says. His voice is raw, as if the Dementors still have their hands around his throat. Wormtail, look at what you did. Peter flinches. He stares up, eyes wet, darting between wands. Harry's, Hermione's, Ron's, Remus's, Sirius's. So many chances for a single spell to end him. Remus's expression goes carefully blank. It's not apathy. It's containment. The last time he saw Sirius, he thought he was staring at a traitor. The last marauder, the last friend, dead to him. Now the floor has dropped away. If Sirius is innocent, then the betrayal came from somewhere else. From the boy who used to sleep 2 beds over and complain about homework. Remus, Sirius says, catching that blankness. Moony, say something. Remus doesn't look at him. He looks at Peter, at the rat animagus whose secret he helped keep, at the man who watched him turn into a monster every full moon and still chose Voldemort. What if we stop pretending? Remus's voice is soft, but it cuts through the grief like a knife. Peter, tell them about the Fidelius. Peter shakes his head frantically. Remus, please. Tell them, Remus repeats. Tell Harry who you were supposed to be protecting. Harry's breath catches. The secret keeper, he says. My parents' secret keeper. Sirius swallows. We switched, he forces out. We thought Voldemort would come after me, so we made Peter the secret keeper instead. James's choice. My idea. Remus's eyes close briefly. Confirmation. The night everything changed was built on a single desperate choice, and they all misjudged the weakest among them. Say it, Remus orders. There's no warmth now, only war. Say you were secret keeper. Say you betrayed them. Peter's shoulders shudder. I was the secret keeper, he whispers. I told the Dark Lord where they were. I betrayed James and Lily. Please, Remus, don't let him kill me. Sirius moves. Fast. The wand comes up, the old curse on his lips. Avada, Remus is faster. His hand slams into Sirius's wrist, knocking it aside. Deserves it, you know he does. He left deserves it, you know he does. He left Harry an orphan. He left you alone, he left me in Azkaban. I know. Remus's reply is a whisper, but the shack falls into a ringing silence around it. Merlin, Sirius, I know, but if you cast that curse, you go back to Azkaban. Or worse, and Harry loses you. Again. Hermione's hand tightens on Harry's sleeve. Snape stares, eyes narrowed, weighing every word like evidence. Remus keeps going. We need him alive. For your freedom. For the truth. For the war that isn't over, no matter what Fudge says. Voldemort doesn't rise this far without help. If Peter ran once, he'll run again. To someone. He looks at Harry, not at Sirius. If he lives, the Ministry has to listen. They have to clear Sirius. They have to admit the First War never really ended. Harry deserves that. The world deserves that. Sirius's chest heaves. Choice has never felt this heavy. Slowly, shaking, he lowers his wand. Fine, he grinds out. He lives. For now. And that decision, that refusal to kill, is what turns a vengeance story into something else. This is that story. The march back to Hogwarts. Prisoner and proof. The march begins in a rush of decisions. No one speaks at first. The night everything changed is not over yet. Remus moves first, professional, precise. His wand flicks and ropes snake out, not just incarcerous, but a layered web of bindings that bite into cloth and skin without breaking it. Ankles, knees, wrists, elbows, chest pinned to his sides. A separate cord lashes Peter's wand hand to a conjured wooden board, fingers splayed so he can't even twitch toward a spell. Animagus restraints, Remus says, voice flat. Another spell slams into Peter, an ugly, shimmering mesh that clings to his body. If he tries to transform, it'll constrict. Hermione is already there, eyes wide, breathing too fast, brain faster. That's not enough, she blurts. He's small as a rat. He could slip almost anything. We need redundancies. She rattles them off. A detection charm keyed to sudden mass change. A stasis field on his lower limbs. A tether charm linking his ropes to Remus's wand so any tampering screams through the connection. Each new spell lands with a crackle in the damp air. Peter whimpers. No one looks away. Harry walks behind them, just close enough to see Peter's shoulders jerk with each sob. The world feels tilted. Sirius is innocent. The thought keeps looping, too big to fit in his skull. Sirius, who risked everything to break out, who stared at him with wild, desperate hope, is not the traitor. The man trussed up like a parcel in front of him is his parents' friend, his parents' murderer. The grief doesn't come as tears. It comes as a cold, bright focus that cuts through the grief like a knife. Every time Peter stumbles, Harry's fingers twitch toward his wand. A part of him wants this man dead. Another part remembers the choice Sirius just made. The choice to make this a story about proof, not revenge. What if he ruins that now? Ahead, Sirius and Remus fall into an old pattern without speaking. Flanking positions. Wands out, slightly lowered. Every junction, every shadowed doorway is scanned, assessed, dismissed, or filed as a threat. To Harry, they suddenly look older. Not just his professor and the mad escaped prisoner, but veterans of a war the Ministry pretends is over. "This is a high-value prisoner," Remus murmurs, just loud enough for Sirius and Hermione to hear. "We lose him. We lose everything." Sirius nods once. "We keep him breathing. We get him in front of Dumbledore, in front of witnesses. Veritaserum, if we have to." His voice is harsh, but underneath there's something Harry has never heard there before. Hope. Because they're not dragging a rat back to Hogwarts. They're carrying the only living witness who can say, under oath, that Sirius never betrayed the Potters. The man whose confession could rip open Ministry complacency, expose Azkaban as a dumping ground for the inconvenient, prove that the First War never really ended. It just went quiet. Harry pictures Fudge's face when he has to admit they locked up the wrong man. He pictures the Daily Prophet headlines. He pictures never going back to Privet Drive. But as they crest the hill and the castle looms, black against the sky, another truth presses in. The full moon is rising tomorrow. The wolfsbane is wearing thin in Remus's veins. The corridors of Hogwarts are not as safe as they pretend to be, and there are powerful people who will do anything to keep this truth buried. So the march back to Hogwarts is not a victory parade. It is an opening move in a war Harry is only just beginning to see. Full moon. Full truth. Chaos in the castle. The corridor is too quiet. For a heartbeat, Harry can almost pretend this isn't the night everything changed. But the moon is climbing, cold and merciless, and Remus Lupin is breathing too fast. They reach the grounds in a ragged cluster. Sirius with his hand clamped on Pettigrew's bound shoulder. Hermione white-faced, wand out. Snape floating behind them, half-conscious on a stretcher of ropes, his robes dragging through the grass. What if the truth they've finally dragged into the open is about to be swallowed by something older and more savage than any Ministry trial? Remus stops walking. "Don't," his voice breaks. "Don't come any closer." Harry hears it then. The tremor in his teacher's words. The wet click of changing bones. The full moon edges free of the clouds and pours straight down onto Remus's face. His pupils blow wide. His hands curl. The wolfsbane that Hermione brewed has stretched him through this month, but they all know the limits. It was taken hours ago. It is wearing thin. Peter stares at Remus and screams, "Move him!" Sirius snarls. The choice is instant. No speech, no plan. Just war reflex. "Get him away from Moony!" Harry and Hermione lunge for Pettigrew's arms as Sirius shoves him toward them. The ropes bite into Harry's fingers. Peter is shaking, babbling, trying to twist into a rat and failing because of the binding spells layered over his skin. Behind them, Remus drops to his knees, gasping, nails tearing at the earth. Snape groans. His eyes slit open. He stares up at the scene, Lupin convulsing, Sirius hauling a trussed classmate, Harry and Hermione dragging a man who should be dead. "Potter! Granger! What?" He sees Peter's face. For one knife-sharp second, recognition and disbelief cut through the grief like a knife. The boy he taught, the spy he suspected, the man the world buried, alive, bound, exposed as an animagus with his own Slytherin cunning turned against him. Snape's mouth opens, some curse or accusation forming. The crack of Remus's spine finishing its transformation drowns him out. The werewolf rises. There is no trace of the professor in that stare. Just hunger and pain and a wild, directionless rage. The air fills with the stench of fur and blood and old stone memories. This room This story has seen this monster before. "Run!" Sirius shouts. He doesn't wait to see if they obey. He explodes forward, body twisting, bones reshaping with familiar, practiced agony. Padfoot hits the ground where Sirius stood, huge and black and snarling, interposing himself between the werewolf and the children. The clash is brutal. No elegance, no spell, just teeth on fur, claws on muscle, two beasts slamming into each other hard enough to shake the walls. Harry can't look away. He is trained for war in theory in dueling rooms and safe corridors, but this is different. This is raw and animal and horrifying. Hermione yanks at his sleeve. "Harry, Peter—" Right. The witness. The key. The man Voldemort needs, and the man Sirius needs alive. They drag Pettigrew toward the trees, away from snapping jaws and flying blood. Behind them, Snape tries to rise to aim his wand to make sense of a dead man in ropes and a werewolf in school robes. A stray blow from Padfoot's massive shoulder slams into him, sends him crashing back into stone. His head strikes with a sickening thud. Silence. He slumps, knocked clean out, the image of Peter's living face burned into his mind even as consciousness leaves him. When it's over, when the moon rides high and the werewolf is driven, howling into the forest by Padfoot's relentless assault, Peter Pettigrew is still there, alive, bound, undeniable, animagus, traitor, witness. And as Harry stares down at him, chest heaving, he realizes this is not the end of the story. It is the opening argument. Because when dawn comes, who controls this truth? The Ministry, Dumbledore, or Sirius Black will decide what kind of war they're all about to fight. Dawn in the hospital wing, choosing to fight the system. Dawn comes in bands of grey through the high windows and the hospital wing is too quiet. Harry wakes to the taste of metal and dust in his mouth, heart already racing before he remembers why. Then it slams back into him. The Shrieking Shack. The forest. Peter Pettigrew screaming as spells wrapped him in chains. The night everything changed. He turns his head. There. Reality. Sirius Black is propped against a pillow, wrists bound in heavy ministry manacles that glow faintly with containment spells. He looks wrecked and thinner than ever, but his eyes are clearer, less wild, as if just having Peter alive in the next bed has cut through the grief like a knife. Remus sits in a chair between them, still in yesterday's torn robes, grey-faced and trembling from the full moon and the fight, his wand resting loose in his hand. And Peter, on the far bed, swaddled in enchanted ropes, layered with stunners and body binds, two grim auras standing guard at his feet. His rat hand twitches once, then goes still. Animagus, traitor, witness. The door opens with a soft creak that somehow slices the silence in half. Dumbledore walks in. His gaze moves in a slow, precise arc, from Sirius in chains, to Remus's hollow eyes, to Peter's bound form, and finally to Harry, awake and staring back. For a heartbeat, the headmaster's face is utterly unguarded. Calculation, fear, hope, war. "This," he says quietly, "is quite a tableau." Sirius barks a laugh that isn't a laugh at all. "Tableau? That's Peter. Alive. You have your proof, Dumbledore. Call the Ministry. Now." Remus's voice is rough. "He can confirm everything. Godric's Hollow, the Fidelius, Azkaban. This doesn't stay in a hospital wing." Dumbledore folds his hands, the picture of calm, but Harry can see the tension in his shoulders. "You both understand what you're asking. To reveal that an Order member was the traitor, that the Ministry imprisoned the wrong man without trial. In this climate, such a revelation could shatter what fragile stability we have left. What if the panic does more harm than good?" Pattern interrupt. Harry hears it, feels it, the invitation to let the adults decide the story. He pushes himself upright, pain flaring in his ribs. "They were my parents," he says, voice shaking but loud in the cavernous room. "Everyone thinks my dad was reckless, and my mum died because some secret keeper failed. They died because Peter sold them. Because the Ministry refused to listen. How is hiding that any better?" Dumbledore's eyes close for a moment, as if the weight of that choice presses physically on him. "Harry." "No." Harry's hands fist in the sheets. "You told me once that the truth is a beautiful and terrible thing. So this is the truth. You can't keep it quiet just because it's inconvenient. Not when Sirius is still treated like he's dead to the world. Not when Peter is right there. The auras stare straight ahead, but their knuckles whiten on their wands. Even Madame Pomfrey has gone still behind her desk. Dumbledore opens his eyes. The calculation is still there, but something older stands beside it now. Duty. Grief. Resolve. This is that story where the boy who lived refuses to be a symbol without a say. Very well, he says at last, each word deliberate. We will not bury this. I will summon the Minister and the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. There will be a formal inquiry with Veritaserum, records, and witnesses. His gaze flicks once more to Peter. Understand, all of you, this will shake the wizarding world. Old alliances will crack. Old enemies will stir. The war you remember may not be as dead as people hoped. Sirius straightens as far as the chains allow. Remus's hand tightens around his wand. Harry feels something settle in his chest. Not peace, but purpose. What if this is the moment they stop surviving other people's choices and start making their own? Outside, the first rays of real sunlight hit the castle. Inside, Dumbledore reaches for the flu powder. The system is about to be dragged into the light. Ministry on the move, fudge, auras, and a rat on display. The castle wakes to the sound of boots. Not students. Heavier. Purposeful. The war coming up the marble staircase in Ministry issue Dragonhide. By the time the sun has fully cleared the Forbidden Forest, Cornelius Fudge is sweeping through the front doors with a cluster of auras at his back. Cloaks snapping. Wands already in their hands. He is rattled, face shiny with sweat, eyes flicking to every shadow as if Sirius Black might leap out of the suits of armour. This is the second time, he hisses to Dumbledore as they stride toward the hospital wing. Second time Black has been found in this castle. If word gets out, Dumbledore's gaze is steady, almost cold. Word must get out, Cornelius. The hospital wing is too bright, too clean. It should not be the place where the night everything changed is dragged into daylight, but the beds are already lined with witnesses. Harry, pale but upright. Hermione, jaw set. Ron, white-faced and shaking. Madame Pomfrey hovers, scandalized but silent. A muggle-born healer in training from St. Mungo's, here on rotation, clutches her clipboard and stares. On the middle bed, bound by conjured silver cords, lies Peter Pettigrew. Fudge stops dead. That, he says, voice gone thin, is impossible. His gaze jerks to Sirius, chained to a nearby bed, then back to the small, balding man. Pettigrew is dead. I saw the Order of Merlin recommendation myself. This is some trick. Polyjuice. A spell! Sirius actually laughs, a raw, disbelieving sound that cuts through the grief like a knife. Ask him about Godric's Hollow, he snarls. Ask him who really betrayed James and Lily. An aura steps forward. Proudfoot. Scarred, tired, not easily impressed. Minister, with respect, we have procedures. His wand is already out. Headmaster, permission? Dumbledore nods once. Proudfoot moves to the bed. Up close, Peter is shaking so hard the cords tremble. His eyes dart from wand to wand, calculating exits that don't exist. Revelio Animeus, Proudfoot intones. The spell hits Peter like a splash of cold water. For a heartbeat, his form blurs. The suggestion of whiskers, a tail, the twitching panic of a cornered rat before snapping back. The air itself seems to recoil. Silence. Then a low murmur from the gathered staff and students. The muggle-born healer in training whispers, Animagus confirmation charm, under her breath, as if cataloguing evidence for a future tribunal. Fudge swallows. Could be coerced transformation, he mutters. Some dark spell forcing... Prior incantato, Proudfoot says, already shifting to Peter's wand, sealed in a clear containment tube. The ghostly echoes spill out. A shield charm. A stunning spell. Something uglier and green-edged that makes several people flinch. Then, faint but undeniable, the spectral impression of a street exploding outward. A dozen tiny lights winking out in an instant. 12 dead muggles. One finger on the cobblestones. Harry's stomach lurches. Hermione's hand finds his without thinking. This is that story, he realizes. Not the bedtime version of a dead hero and a mad traitor, but the raw, unedited truth. Proudfoot's jaw tightens. Matches the report from the explosion, he says quietly. Same pattern. Same spell. What if, Hermione says, voice shaking but clear, the Ministry was wrong? Her words hang there, a direct challenge. What if you put the wrong man in Azkaban? The Muggle-born healer in training nods, eyes fierce now. I'll be filing my report with St. Mungo's and the board, she says. This can't disappear. Fudge flinches as if struck. Witnesses. Too many witnesses. Muggle-born, half-blood, pure-blood, students and staff. A headmaster. Auras. A story that will not be easily buried. His narrative, Sirius Black, mass murderer, Peter Pettigrew, fallen hero, wavers in the air between them like a fragile glamour. And then it cracks. Fudge grips the bedrail to steady himself. We will need a formal inquiry, he manages. This is highly irregular. The public has a right to the truth, Dumbledore finishes. Harry watches Fudge's face, sees the exact moment the man understands that his choices, his fear, have helped shape this war. That if this gets out, nothing at the Ministry will stay the same. What happens to a system when its favourite lie is dragged into the light and forced to confess? We're about to find out. The interrogation. 12 years of lies unravel. The chamber is open and full of whispers. Pettigrew is strapped into a magically reinforced chair in the centre of courtroom 10, iron bands gleaming with runes that pulse every time he twitches. Auras ring the circle. Dumbledore stands at the edge of the light, face carved in stone. McGonagall is a rigid line of tartan and fury. On the benches above, Harry and Sirius stare down, hearts pounding in the same frantic rhythm. This is not a trial. Not yet. This is the moment the Ministry decides whether its favourite lie survives the night everything changed. State your name for the record, Madame Bones says. Her monocle flashes. Peter Pettigrew, he whispers. His voice shakes. I am an Order member. I was attacked. Sirius's chains rattle as he surges half an inch forward. An Auror's hand lands on his shoulder. Harry feels the pressure in his own chest, the need to scream the truth, to cast a spell, to do anything. What if he lies, Harry thinks. What if they believe him? Dumbledore's voice cuts through the grief like a knife. You claim you were attacked by Sirius Black on the 1st of November, 1981. Yes, Peter seizes on the story, eyes darting. He hunted me through the streets. He murdered those muggles. Without a wand? Dumbledore asks softly. You told Auras his wand had already been destroyed in Godric's Hollow, an unusual choice to hunt you unarmed. The silence is sharp. The lie hangs there, exposed. Bones doesn't waste it. Bring the Veritaserum. Fudge flinches. Is that really legal? Bones's gaze is cold. For a man presumed dead, implicated in the deaths of 13 muggles and the betrayal of the Potters? Yes, Minister, it is. 3 clear drops. Peter fights, but the chair's restraints glow, and the potion slides down his throat. Who was the Potter's secret keeper? Bones asks. Me, Peter gasps. The word rips out of him. It was me. We switched. James thought, I suggested, no one would suspect. Harry's world tilts. He had known, but hearing it here in this place makes the war feel suddenly real. Not a story he stepped into as a baby. A choice. A betrayal. Did Sirius Black know of this switch? Dumbledore asks. No, Peter chokes. Only me, and the Dark Lord. McGonagall closes her eyes. For a heartbeat, she looks dead on her feet. Ed. Describe your death, Bones presses. 12 muggles killed. Your finger found. Explain. I blew the street apart, Peter says dully. Cut off my own finger. Transformed. Ran into the sewers. They stared at Sirius. They screamed. They thought he did it. Harry's stomach turns. Transformed into what? A rat, Peter whispers. Dumbledore's eyes sharpen. Where have you been hiding, Peter? With a family, he says. A wizarding family. The Weasleys. As their pet. 12 years. Ron makes a strangled sound from the benches. Molly Weasley's hand flies to her mouth. Harry feels something cold and poisonous slide down his spine. The rat that slept in Ron's bed. Sat on his pillow. Curled in his lap on the Hogwarts Express. Peter's breathing turns ragged. The Veritaserum is merciless. Is Voldemort dead? Dumbledore asks. Peter's eyes roll back. No, he rasps. He is less than a ghost, but not gone. Waiting. I was supposed to find him. Help him rise. There are others. They have plans if I fail. The chamber erupts. Shouts. Spells flaring as auras force order back into the room. Harry doesn't move. He just stares at Peter Pettigrew and realizes this is that story. The one where the truth arrives early and so does the next war. Because if Voldemort isn't truly gone, who is already moving in the dark to replace the rat they just caught? Sirius on trial. A war crime finally reversed. The chamber is open and full of whispers. Not the Shrieking Shack this time. The Wizengamot, high stone benches, cold purple robes, a ring of eyes staring down at one man in chains who refuses to bow his head. Sirius Black is brought in through the side door, flanked by auras, but he doesn't move like a dead man. He walks like someone who has already survived Azkaban and is now walking towards something harder. The truth. Dumbledore at his right, Remus at his left. For the first time since the night everything changed, he is not alone. Cornelius Fudge clears his throat, the sound brittle in the vaulted silence. This special session, he announces, is merely a formality, a tidy resolution to an old tragedy. His voice strains on the word tidy, because nothing about this story is tidy. Not the war, not the grief. Not the fact that the Ministry threw Sirius into Azkaban without a trial and never once asked what if we were wrong. Sirius stares up at the benches. He remembers being dragged away in 81, no chance to speak, James dead in the hallway, Lily on the floor, Peter screaming in that muggle street. Now the memory sits beside him in human form, shaking on a conjured chair, silver chains wrapped around his wrists. Peter Pettigrew. Amelia Bones rises. Her wand is steady. Veritaserum has been administered and verified, she says. The witness will answer. Pattern interrupt. For once, Dumbledore does not speak first. He watches, calculating, letting the Ministry expose its own rot before he moves. State your name, Bones orders. Peter. Pettigrew. The words drag out of him, torn free by the potion. Were you secret keeper for James and Lily Potter? Yes. Did Sirius Black betray the Potters to you-know-who? No. The answer cuts through the grief like a knife. Gasps shudder around the chamber. Quills scratch frantically as Daily Prophet reporters lean forward, eyes wide. Who betrayed them? Bones presses. I did, Peter whispers, then louder because the spell demands it. I did. I went to the Dark Lord. I told him the address. I framed Sirius in the street. I killed the Muggles. I cut off my own finger and transformed. Fudge blanches. Clearly, he says too quickly, we were all deceived by extraordinary dark magic. No reasonable minister, no reasonable ministry could have anticipated. Dumbledore finally stands. His voice is soft, but it carries. And yet, Minister, some of us did anticipate treachery. We warned of Death Eaters hiding in plain sight. We begged for trials during the war, even for the worst of them. Your predecessors chose expedience over justice. Sirius Black was not the only one thrown to the Dementors without hearing or evidence. He doesn't shout. He doesn't need to. Each measured word pins the Wizengamot to their own choices. This is that story, the one where Dumbledore stops playing the distant chess master and uses the truth as a weapon in public. What if, he asks quietly, we had insisted on truth then? How many innocents would have been spared Azkaban? How many guilty would we have found before they slipped back into our institutions? Faces shift. Old allies of Dumbledore straighten. Fence-sitters suddenly remember which side looks safer when the next war comes. Bones delivers the final question. Did Sirius Black cast the blasting curse on that Muggle street? No, I did. The vote is almost anticlimactic. Wands raise. Lights flare. The tally orbits the chamber in glowing numbers before resolving into a single word. Cleared. For a heartbeat, there is perfect silence. Then the room explodes. Shouts, arguments, reporters scribbling the headline that will rip through every home in Britain by morning. Sirius, Black innocent. Sirius doesn't hear the rest. Remus's hand is on his shoulder. Dumbledore's eyes meet his, already planning the next move. Because the trial is over, but the war this truth will start is only beginning. A godfather at last, custody and the question of home. The atrium is blinding. Marble floors, golden light, the echo of 100 voices crashing against the high ceiling. The trial doors swing open, and for the first time in 12 years, Sirius Black walks into the ministry, not as a prisoner, but as a free man. No chains, no dementors, just Remus at his side and the weight of a war's worth of grief on his shoulders. Flashbulbs explode, quills scratch. Someone screams, "Sirius, over here!" But he barely hears them because Harry is already moving. Past Dumbledore, past Fudge, past terrified auras who half raise wands before remembering the verdict that cut through the grief like a knife. Innocent. Harry slams into him. Hard, desperate hug. Sirius staggers, then folds around him, burying his face in Harry's hair. For a heartbeat, there is silence even here. No ministry, no reporters. Just a godfather holding the boy he was supposed to raise. This is that story, the one where he gets a second chance. They separate only when the questions start flying. "Mr. Black, where will you live?" "Harry, are you returning to your Muggle relatives?" "Headmaster, is the boy who lived safe?" The word hits Sirius like a spell. Relatives. He doesn't wait. "I'm his godfather," he snaps, voice rough but steady. "James and Lily chose me. Harry is coming with me." The atrium stirs. Reporters lean in. It's not just a reunion anymore. It's a custody battle beginning in real time. Dumbledore steps forward, blue eyes tired, calculating. "Sirius," he says quietly, but the whole room listens. "There are protections to consider. The blood magic at Privet Drive." Harry stiffens. "I'm not going back there." That single choice hangs between them. What if Harry refuses the plan that kept him hidden for 13 years? What if the night everything changed in Godric's Hollow doesn't have to define where he sleeps now? Fudge blusters about procedure, about guardianship papers and psychological evaluations after Azkaban. The word unstable hovers in the air, unspoken but understood. Remus moves then, quiet as ever, but his presence cuts through the noise. "Minister," he says, "Sirius is innocent, but if it reassures the ministry, I'll register as co-guardian. Shared custody. 2 adults, 1 werewolf you can regulate, 1 wrongly imprisoned man you can monitor. It's a calculated offer, a stabilizing influence, a way to say, Harry will not be alone with a man you still fear." Dumbledore's gaze sharpens. "You believe you can keep him safe, both of you, if Voldemort returns?" The name chills the room, because Peter's testimony is still ringing in everyone's ears. The Dark Lord not dead, only diminished. A wraith clinging to life, waiting. Harry stares at the floor, remembering cold hands and high, dead laughter. If Peter is right, Dumbledore continues, then Harry remains a target. The blood protection isn't the only protection, Sirius bites out. "You're the greatest wizard of our age. Are you telling me you can't protect a house?" Remus adds softer. "Let him have a home, Albus. Not a cupboard. A home." The argument stretches late into the evening, into private rooms and hushed corridors. Risk versus right. War versus childhood. What if the safest cage still damages the bird inside it? In the end, Dumbledore makes a different choice. Harry will not return to the Dursleys. Instead, Sirius's home, wherever it is, will become an experiment in layered magic. Blood wards replaced by something new. Protections bound to Harry's presence, keyed to Sirius's guardianship, anchored by Remus's steady magic. Fidelius-like veils, anti-apparition fields, charms that scream warnings through the walls if a dark mark crosses the boundary. It's not perfect, it's not certain, but it is a home built for Harry, not a hiding place built around his scar. And as Sirius signs the guardianship parchment with a hand that still trembles, one thought burns through him. The war took James and Lily. It will not take Harry's childhood. Not this time. Leaving Privet Drive, the boy who finally goes home. The knock comes just after sunset. Not a timid tap, a measured, deliberate pounding that seems to echo through every cupboard and crack in number 4, Privet Drive. The door rattles. A motor rumbles outside, low and impossible, a sound that does not belong on this dead, neat street. Petunia opens the door. The flying motorbike hovers at the curb, chrome catching the last smear of light. Sirius Black stands on the step in dragonhide and worn boots, hair loose, eyes hard. Beside him, Remus Lupin is clean, pressed, almost mild in his shabby suit. Together they do not fit the story the Dursleys tell themselves about normal. Petunia's face drains of colour. She just stares. "Petunia Evans," Remus says, voice quiet, precise. "We're here for Harry." Upstairs, Harry has already heard the engine. He's halfway down the stairs when Vernon blusters into the hall, purple and sweating, sputtering about freaks and permission. Sirius's gaze slides past him and lands on the tiny door under the stairs. The cupboard. For a second, the war is back. Azkaban is back. James's laugh is dead in his ears. Then Sirius moves. 1 step, 2. He rips the cupboard door open with a spell so sharp it might as well have cut through the grief like a knife. Shelves, a thin mattress, a line of childish drawings in crumpled crayon. Sirius does not speak. He just stares at the space where his godson once slept like luggage. His hands shake. Remus fills the silence. "You kept him in here," he says, not a question. His tone is devastatingly polite, every syllable a judgment. "While you took the second bedroom for storage," Dudley squeaks. Petunia flinches. Vernon starts to roar something, but Remus only turns his head, amber eyes cold. "I suggest you let Harry pack. Now." That word, pack, hits Harry like a spell. In his room, he moves fast. Trunk open, robes, books, photo album, the firebolt. Hedwig's empty cage catches his eye and grief twists, but beneath it is something else. A surreal, rising joy. He is leaving. For good. How many summers could have been different if this had happened when he was 11? What if the night everything changed at Godric's Hollow had ended with Sirius taking him home, instead of Dumbledore leaving him here? Dumbledore's name hangs over the house even now. Wards shimmer faintly at the corners of Harry's vision as Sirius and Remus walk the perimeter, murmuring counterspells and layering new protections that do not depend on Petunia's reluctant blood. No headmaster arrives. No phoenix song. Only the distant sense of an old man choosing, for once, not to interfere. It is a choice that shifts something fundamental. Harry feels it in his bones. His life is no longer a plan on someone else's chessboard. Trunk shrunk. Owl treats pocketed, wand in hand. He steps out into the night. Privet Drive is too quiet, the neighbour's curtains twitching. Sirius swings onto the motorbike, jaw still tight from the cupboard. Remus climbs on behind, steady, anchoring. Harry hesitates for a heartbeat, then Sirius looks back and his expression softens. "Come on, Prongslet," he says. "Let's go home." Harry climbs between them, pressed between leather and wool, between fury and control, between past and something terrifyingly hopeful. The engine roars. Streetlights smear into bright lines as they lift off, the neat little houses falling away beneath them. This is that story. The boy who finally goes home. And as the wind tears at his hair and the warded suburb shrinks to a pinprick, Harry has no idea that someone else is watching the sky that night, realizing the protections have broken and making a very different choice of their own. Number 12, New Life, Building the Marauder Household. Number 12, Grimmauld Place is not a home. Not at first. The house stared back at Harry when they arrived, its windows dead and blank behind peeling curtains, the door a slab of black wood that seemed to swallow sound. Sirius stood beside him on the step, shoulders tense, jaw set. "It was my prison before Azkaban," he said quietly. "What if we make it yours in name, and never in truth?" Inside, the air was thick with dust and old spells. The silence felt heavy, pressed down by generations of whispered hatred. While Burger's portrait screamed the moment the door shut, a blast of pure, concentrated grief and rage that cut through the grief like a knife. Sirius didn't flinch. He drew his wand, Remus beside him, and together they worked. Silencing charms, layered wards, a thick black curtain nailed over the frame, each hammer blow a choice to rewrite a legacy. This is that story. The story where the House of Black is stripped, room by room. Cursed heirlooms locked away for auras, dark books sealed. Creature glowering but listening as Sirius, voice rough, orders him to help clean, with boundaries, with rules, with a grudging, new respect. War relics are boxed, windows are opened, light, actual daylight, forces its way inside. The first morning, breakfast is a disaster. Sirius burns the toast. The kettle boils over. Harry sits at an actual table while Sirius piles his plate with food and presents in equal measure. New robes, a broom servicing kit, a set of Chudley Cannons posters he clearly bought in a panic. "Anything you want, you tell me," Sirius says too fast. "You've gone without enough." Remus watches all of this, tired eyes soft. He's the one who clears the table with a casual flick of his wand, then puts a hand on Sirius's shoulder. "We're not buying him a childhood," he murmurs. "We're building one." Then to Harry, steady and calm. "You can say no to anything, including second helpings." It's the small shocks that hit Harry hardest. His own room, a door that locks from the inside, not the outside, a wardrobe with clothes that fit, shelves that slowly fill with books, a desk where Remus leaves neatly copied spell diagrams and notes in looping handwriting. The first time Harry goes quiet at dinner, lost in the memory of a cupboard and a shouted insult, Sirius actually notices. "You went somewhere," Sirius says. Not accusing, just observing. "Where?" Harry stares at his plate. The words don't want to come, but they do, bit by bit. When he falters, Remus asks careful questions, not to pry, but to understand. No one calls him ungrateful. No one tells him to stop. Training seeps into the walls almost without Harry realizing. Remus corrects his grip on a fork, then on a wand, in the same gentle motion. Sirius demonstrates a shield charm in the kitchen when a pan explodes, then turns the moment into a lesson on reflexes, on never drawing your wand without thinking about where the spell will land. Over tea, Remus tells stories about James baiting a Slytherin into a duel and then refusing to use a curse he couldn't name ethically. Strategy and ethics wrapped in memory. Pattern interrupt. One night Harry wakes from a nightmare, wand in hand, a spell half formed on his lips. He expects punishment. Instead, Sirius appears in the doorway, hair wild, eyes sharp, and says, "Good, you reached for your wand. Now, let's teach you when not to." Slowly, the emotional ground shifts. Harry starts to believe the unthinkable, that he is loved, not for his scar or his fame, but for his stubbornness, his questions, the way he listens when Remus explains a complex ward. When he volunteers to help clean the library, Sirius actually smiles, not manic, not guilty, just proud. And that pride, that steady, relentless noticing is what will change everything when the Ministry and Dumbledore next try to tell Harry where he belongs. Training a different chosen one, early lessons in power. The living room becomes a battlefield long before Harry ever steps back into Hogwarts. Cushions stacked as barricades, furniture shoved against the walls, chalk lines on the floor where Sirius insists a duelist lives or dies. Harry stands in the centre, wand raised, heart hammering, as Sirius circles him with the restless energy of someone who has spent too long powerless and is determined never to feel that way again. "Again," Sirius snaps. "Shield up before you even think about the counter." The stinging hex hits Harry's hastily raised protego and ricochets into the mantelpiece. The spell leaves a black scorch, the air sharp with ozone and dust. Harry flinches, then forces himself still. He remembers the Ministry, the way spells screamed past him, the way grief cut through the grief like a knife when Sirius fell. In this story, that memory is a phantom from another timeline, but the fear feels real enough. "What if you don't get a second to think?" Sirius demands. "What if they don't wait for you to be ready?" Harry adjusts his stance. Short, balanced. Sirius has drilled this into him until his muscles remember even when his mind is tired. Shield, sidestep, disarm. Never just block, redirect, never just react, anticipate. The living room rings with impact as spells slam into invisible barriers and vanish in showers of blue sparks. When Sirius pushes too hard, Remus appears in the doorway, quiet as a shadow. He doesn't shout. He doesn't need to. That's enough for now. Sirius opens his mouth to argue, then shuts it when he sees Harry's shaking hand. The war is still a ghost, but the cost is written in the tightness around Remus's eyes. Upstairs, the battleground shifts. Books instead of cushions. Ink instead of scorch marks. Remus lays out a deck of hand-drawn cards. Dementor, Boggart, Inferius, Werewolf. The art is brutal and honest. "Tell me," he says, placing the Dementor card between them. "Not just what it is, what it wants." Harry stares at the skeletal hand. "It wants everything you're afraid of. It wants you to drown in it." "Good," Remus murmurs. "Fear isn't an enemy. It's information. If you know what your mind does under pressure, you can choose your response instead of being dragged by it. They move from creatures to curses, from theory to psychology. Why the Cruciatus breaks some people faster than others. Why some wizards become dead-eyed executioners while others refuse, even with a wand at their throat." Harry learns the names of obscure hexes he's never seen and, more importantly, the ways to counter them, or avoid them entirely. On quieter afternoons, Sirius spreads parchment across the kitchen table and draws 3 crude animal shapes: a stag, a dog, a rat. "We were idiots," he says, but there's a fierce pride under the words. "Idiots who refuse to leave our friend alone every full moon. So we learned to change." Harry listens as they unravel the Animagus project, the stolen library books, the near disasters, the choice to take on risk for loyalty. Remus adds the missing pieces: magical theory, legal consequences, the way transformation rewires your sense of self. "What if you could do it properly?" Remus asks quietly. "Registered, monitored, safe, power without the lies that nearly got us all killed." A seed lodges in Harry's chest. Not yet, but soon. This is that story. Not of a boy stumbling into chambers and forests unprepared, surviving because adults arrive at the last second, but of a boy taught to ask, before every danger. Who benefits? What am I not being told? What spell will I need that no one expects me to know? When Dumbledore speaks in half-truths, Harry will hear the gaps. When the Ministry smiles, he will watch their hands. Because in the late-night silence, when Sirius thinks Harry is asleep, he and Remus talk in low, grim voices about prophecies and dark marks that never really faded. They are not training a student. They are training a soldier for a war they can feel moving under the surface, even if the Dark Lord is still, for now, only a dead whisper in Harry's scar. Peter's fate. Azkaban. Execution, or something worse. The chamber is open and full of whispers. Not the Chamber of Secrets, the high, domed courtroom of the Ministry, where chains rattle on ancient chairs and the past refuses to stay dead. Peter Pettigrew sits shackled in the centre, small and trembling, while the Wizengamot stares down at him like a ring of jewelled vultures. This is the moment they decide what to do with the man who betrayed the Potters and framed Sirius Black. This is that story. "Life in Azkaban," one witch says, voice clipped. "The Dementor's kiss," another counters, cold as the stone beneath their feet. A third, older wizard clears his throat and dares to say the word almost no one uses anymore. Execution. The word seems to cut through the grief like a knife. Harry flinches in his seat beside Sirius and Remus. He hears the echo of his mother's scream in his nightmares, feels the phantom heat of green light. Part of him wants Peter dead. Another part is horrified that they are discussing killing a man who now sits bound and sobbing. No wand, no rat form, no escape. Dumbledore rises slowly. Robes whisper. Fudge watches him with narrowed eyes, already calculating. Because this is not just about justice, it is about optics. About who looks strong, who looks weak, who controls the story when the war everyone pretended was over starts crawling back into the light. What if we do not throw away the only living man who can tell us where the Dark Lord's followers are hiding? Dumbledore's voice is gentle, but it carries. What if, in our haste to punish, we blind ourselves? He does not say. What if Voldemort is not as dead as you need him to be? Fudge's smile is tight. The public will want reassurance, Dumbledore. They will want to see that we do not tolerate Death Eaters. The kiss would be decisive. Decisive. Final. A way to erase a Ministry mistake, to avoid questions about why Sirius never had a trial, why a rat lived on a boy's shoulder for 12 years. Sirius's hands curl into fists. Remus watches the Dementors drifting at the room's edge and feels his skin crawl. Harry stares at Peter and realizes that every choice in this room will shape the war he has been secretly training for. The compromise is brutal in its own way. No kiss. No execution. Azkaban. Life sentence. No chance of parole. Heavy guard. No visitors except Auras and Dumbledore himself. They will keep Peter alive. A shivering archive of names and hideouts and half-remembered rituals. Alive, but neutralized. Or so they tell themselves. Because what if someone comes for him? What if a broken, desperate Death Eater decides that the most valuable prisoner in Azkaban is worth the impossible? Far away in a forest where the trees do not quite remember summer, something thin and venomous stirs. Voldemort, a ragged wisp clinging to existence, feels the chains snap between him and his most loyal coward. No rat. No servant to brew the bone-blood-flesh spell. No hand to cut away in a graveyard. The loss is agony. It is also information. If Peter is gone to stone and iron and Dementor breath, then Voldemort will need a different path, a different sacrifice, a different traitor. And as Peter Pettigrew is dragged to his cell, screaming, Harry's scar burns, not with a dead whisper, but with the first, faint promise that the Dark Lord is already searching for someone else. Someone Harry knows, someone who has already made one unforgivable choice. Year 4, reforged, a different boy, returns to Hogwarts. Year 4 begins in fragments. A ministry hearing room, hot with candlelight and fury, as Fudge is forced to read Peter Pettigrew's signed confession aloud while the Wizengamot stared and Sirius sat in chains that everyone now knew he didn't deserve. Grimmauld Place, a year later, no longer dead and dust-choked but loud with spellfire, as Sirius barks corrections and Remus calmly redirects Harry's stance, Hermione's hair sparking with static as her shield charm holds under both their wands. Third-year corridors, whispers following Harry not because he's the boy who lived, but because he's the boy whose godfather sued the ministry and won. This is that story. The summers become a pattern of their own. 2 weeks at the Burrow, where Molly's grief for the war that almost was makes her hover and fuss, then back to Grimmauld, where Creature glowers but brings Remus his wolfsbane on time, and the Black Library becomes their battlefield. Ancient wards. Blood magic theory. Case files on Death Eaters who never saw Azkaban. Harry learns that choice is a spell too. He goes back to Hogwarts each September, taller, sharper, under more eyes. Auras at the station, just in case. Rita Skeeter's quill scratching what if across the Prophet's front page. What if Dumbledore has lost control of his weapon? What if Sirius Black is building a private army? By the time the fourth-year carriages roll toward the castle, Harry is not the boy who stared up at the ceiling of the Great Hall in awe. He knows how the wards feel against his skin now. He can sense the hum of them, the way Remus taught him, the way Sirius swore James would have done. He steps down from the carriage with his weight balanced, gaze level. Confident, yes, but it's more than that. Strategic. He has seen transcripts of trials, letters between Fudge and Lucius, the quiet notes Dumbledore never meant children to read. He has watched adults fail and lie and compromise. He is done being deferential to anyone who has already proved they will sacrifice him first. Ron feels it most. On platform 9 3/4, there had been that moment of raw tension. Ron's ears read as he muttered about Harry going home to a mansion while the Weasleys counted coins. The hurt is real. So is the way Harry pressed a Gringotts key into Ron's palm the summer before and said, "We're in this war together. I won't stand rich while you stand there worrying about textbooks." Hermione is the bridge between them now because she lives in both worlds. She knows the creak of the black staircase and the warmth of the Burrow's kitchen, the silence after Remus transforms and the way Molly screamed when she thought Harry had been hurt. Their friendship is tighter, messier, truer. They have no secrets about Sirius, about Peter, about the night everything changed. The staff have changed around them too. Snape's bitterness has sharpened into something almost poisonous. Sirius Black walking free through Hogsmeade, Remus Lupin consulting on curriculum, Harry Potter thriving under their roof. That cuts through the grief like a knife he refuses to drop. His glares in potions are no longer just about James. They're about being forced to watch a different future unfold without him. McGonagall, though, watches Harry with a quiet approval she rarely voices. She sees the controlled wand movements, the essays that question ministry policy, the way he positions himself between Neville and danger. She remembers a boy who flinched at raised voices. He doesn't flinch now. And Dumbledore? He has drawn back. Not indifferent, never that, but watchful, weighing. The boy he hoped to guide from a distance now arrives armed with knowledge he did not give, loyalty he did not earn, and guardians who will not let him be a pawn. The carriages halt. Torches flare against the dark. Foreign banners ripple in a wind that smells of rain and old stone. Harry steps onto the gravel, the castle looming above him, ancient and waiting. For the first time, Hogwarts stares back at him as if it does not quite know who he is. This year, with the Triwizard Tournament looming and something darker moving at the edges of the wards, that uncertainty will matter. A tournament without a rat. Who brings back the Dark Lord? The air around Hogwarts feels charged, not just with storm and foreign magic, but with a question. If the rat died in a Shrieking Shack years ago, who brings the Dark Lord back? Voldemort still needs a body. That hunger never left. The wraith that clung to the back of Quirrell's skull, that rode the edges of Albania's forests, is not content to be smoke and memory forever. Lord looks elsewhere. In a locked room, Lord looks elsewhere. In a locked room in the Crouch household, a young man stares at the ceiling and whispers spells to himself until his throat is raw. Barty Crouch Jr. never stopped believing. In canon, he needed Peter to find him, to point him at Hogwarts, to hand him a plan. Here, the fanatic wakes earlier, the night everything changed in Azkaban, when the papers screamed about Sirius Black's exoneration and Peter Pettigrew's death. Something in Barty snapped into focus. If the Ministry can be wrong about Sirius, it can be wrong about him. If one prisoner can walk out, so can another. This is that story. Without Peter to guide him, Barty's escape is messier, more desperate. Maybe he overpowers his father instead of sneaking under an invisibility cloak for years. Maybe Winky fails to stop him on a lonely hillside, and the wand that casts the dark mark at the World Cup is his own hand, unhidden. A declaration of war rather than a test. What if Voldemort doesn't have a careful strategist, but a zealot who wants the world to know he's back? The Triwizard plot shifts with that choice. In canon, Harry's name in the goblet is a surgical strike. One boy, one portkey, one graveyard. Here, Barty might still fixate on Harry, but the method could be cruder. Does he rig the goblet to select a fourth champion again? Or does he aim at someone else? Cedric, Crumb, even Fleur, planning to seize Harry in the chaos that follows. With Sirius and Remus drilling him in counters and constant vigilance, Harry is harder to isolate, harder to trick into touching a cursed cup without question. Lucius Malfoy stands in the middle of this storm. Without Peter's quiet reports, he has less certainty and more fear. Does he play the cautious aristocrat, waiting for undeniable proof before staking his fortune on a dead master? Or does the humiliation of the Sirius scandal, the Ministry's exposed incompetence, push him into reckless devotion, funneling gold and artifacts to any whisper of Voldemort's return? Every choice tightens the noose around the graveyard plan. The Ministry, burned once by locking up the wrong man, is jumpier. Dumbledore has more leverage. Amelia Bones listens when Sirius brings evidence. Harry is better trained, better guarded, surrounded by adults who no longer dismiss his nightmares as childish grief. So when that final task comes, when a Triwizard Cup waits in the maze, can the same ritual even happen? Can a boy with a wand full of practice spells, a godfather watching the exits, and a Ministry on edge still be dragged to a headstone and bled for prophecy? Or does the portkey snap and deliver someone very different to Voldemort's waiting hands? The Triwizard tasks, with a trained Harry. The stands are shaking, not from panic this time, from expectation. From the war of camera flashes as the wizarding public stares down at the boy who lived, the boy who was betrayed, walking into the arena with an exonerated Black in the VIP box. Harry feels all of it. The roar, the pressure, the way the silence underneath his own heartbeat threatens to swallow him. He tightens his grip on his wand and remembers the night everything changed. A shack, a rat, a choice to trust Sirius and Remus when every adult screamed the opposite. This is that story. Preparation didn't start with a sneaked hint from Hagrid. It started the moment his name came out of the goblet and Sirius's face went dead white. Grimmauld Place became a war room. Maps of dragon territories transfigured onto parchment. Old aura manuals spread across the table. Remus pacing, wand in hand, demonstrating line of sight, blind spots, and how Dragonhide deflects most spells, but not well-placed transfiguration. Think control, not conquest, Remus said, voice low. You're not here to win a war with a dragon. You're here to steal an egg. Sirius pushed harder. Mental rehearsal until Harry could close his eyes and walk the arena in his mind. Summoning drills until the Accio Firebolt wasn't a desperate gamble, but a practiced spell, layered with backup plans. Shield charms tuned to Dragon Flame, a smoke spell to break eye contact, a silent, stunning spell for any obstacle that wasn't a Horntail. He's still afraid. His palms sweat. His thoughts race. But fear now runs in channels they carve together, not in wild floods. He moves methodically, checking wand holster, reviewing escape routes, remembering Hermione's last grip on his sleeve. Breathe, then act. In canon, Harry stumbled into alliances. Here, he builds them. Cedric isn't just a rival, he's a co-conspirator. They trade information openly, backed by Amos Diggory's grudging respect for Sirius's legal crusade. Fleur watches this and recalculates, seeing not a clueless boy, but a trained duelist, with a werewolf for a professor and a black for a guardian. Crumb, quiet and intense, tests Harry in the library with sudden spells between shelves, measuring his reactions, then nods once as if accepting a new teammate. What if the tournament stops being 4 isolated champions and becomes a fragile coalition, stitched together by a boy who refuses to repeat his parents' lonely war? Outside the arena, the politics are vicious. The Prophet runs headlines about child endangerment beside glossy photos of Sirius in tailored robes, jaw clenched, hand on his wand. They clear my name, he tells a reporter, and then throw my son to dragons? Fudge flinches at every outcry. Dumbledore watches, calculating how much control he's already lost. Harry flies, but not wildly. He uses the broom as one tool among many, chaining spells in clean, drilled sequences that make even Karkaroff's eyes narrow. The first task ends with the Horntail dazed, not maimed, the egg retrieved, and Madame Pomfrey muttering that she's had worse Quidditch days. The lake is worse. The silence under the water cuts through the grief like a knife, but he's trained for cold, for darkness, for limited air. Remus ran him through underwater charm work in the Black family bath like it was a battlefield. Hermione refined the bubblehead charm until it was stable under pressure. He doesn't improvise with gillyweed this time. He plans. He swims in tight arcs, mapping currents, stunning Grindylows with quick, precise spells. He still chooses to save more than just his own hostage because that's who he is, but he does it efficiently, wand steady, eyes hard. By the time he surfaces, shivering but unbroken, even his enemies are impressed, which makes him, to anyone plotting in the shadows, not just a symbol, a resource, a weapon, a target whose value has just multiplied. So when the maze grows, when the cup waits, who exactly is desperate enough to reach for Harry Potter now, and what spell are they willing to cast to claim him? Graveyard, rewritten, a different resurrection, or none. The stands are full and humming, but the air around the third task feels wrong. Too many auras, too many eyes, too much fear. Fudge's reputation is hanging by a thread after the Azkaban scandal, after the public trials that dragged Peter Pettigrew's name into the light. So the maze grows under watchful wands, layered with detection webs and anti-portkey wards Dumbledore insisted on. The message is clear. Nothing is getting past them again. But war doesn't listen to messages. Barty Crouch Jr. doesn't need the whole maze. Just one gap, one moment, one object no one questions. The cup still gleams at the center, still hums with magic. Only now the trap has to be smarter, thinner, buried under so many ministry signatures, it passes every scan. Harry steps into the hedges with his heart steady and his mind drilled. Sirius and Remus trained him for chaos. Moody, real moody before he vanished, taught him to distrust anything he couldn't verify. So when he reaches the cup, when the hairs on his arms lift and a cold, ritual pulse brushes his magic, he hesitates. Choice. Touch it and win. Step back and lose. Or do something no one has prepared for. He reaches anyway. The pull is brutal. The world snaps. Grass under his knees, tombstones rearing up around him, the smell of damp earth and old grief. The night everything changed in another story is waiting for him here. Only this Harry has read about ritual circles. He's seen Remus lay out runes in salt and ash. He recognizes the bone-white cauldron, the carefully inscribed boundary, the chanting that isn't just a spell but a structure. What if you understand the script of your own sacrifice before the knife falls? He moves before fear can root him. A blasting curse shatters one corner of the circle. A cutting hex snaps the rope around the squirming bundle that must be Crouch. The infant thing that is Voldemort screams as the magic around the cauldron stutters. Without Peter's hand, the ritual was already compromised. Voldemort has dragged another Death Eater here, perhaps McNair, perhaps Avery, forced a blood oath and promised power in return for flesh. The symbolism is nastier now, not the pathetic friend who betrayed for safety, but a true believer maimed for his master. In one branch, Harry's disruption comes too early. The bone of the father falls outside the circle. The blood splashes into broken runes. The hand is taken, but the power has nowhere clean to go. Voldemort rises, but wrong, twisted, translucent, half-anchored, a dead thing screaming through a body that won't hold. Harry duels him and wins ground, not because he's stronger, but because the Dark Lord is leaking magic with every spell. In another, Harry is half a second slower. The circle holds. The graveyard shudders with completed power. Voldemort returns fully, wand in hand, eyes burning with a hatred that could cut through the grief like a knife. But this time, Dumbledore felt the portkey spike. Auras are already tracing it. The Ministry cannot pretend this didn't happen when half its security team watched Harry vanish from under layered wards. Either way, Harry does not leave that graveyard the same. In one path, he staggers back to Hogwarts bearing a weakened monster and shattered ritual lines as proof. In the other, he survives a duel against a fully risen Voldemort with more skill than any 14-year-old should possess. In both, denial dies. And as the echoes of that night settle, one question waits in the silence. If Voldemort has seen this Harry fight, this early, what story does he decide he's at war with now? And who will he send to break the boy before the next spell is cast? Ministry denial. Shattered, Fudge can't look away. This time, the office is too bright. Fudge sits beneath the spinning silver instruments in Dumbledore's study, hat clenched in his hands, as if colour and candlelight can drown out the word that has followed Harry home from the graveyard. Voldemort. In canon, this is where he flinches and hides, where he calls Harry confused, Dumbledore old, and the world not yet ready for the truth. But what if the minister has already been burned, publicly, brutally, for refusing to see what was right in front of him? Sirius Black. Peter Pettigrew. The night everything changed. Fudge still remembers the headlines that cut through the grief like a knife. Minister misled by Ministry's own mistake. Azkaban innocent. He remembers the Wizengamot glare when Pettigrew, under Veritaserum, screamed his confession to Godric's Hollow and 13 Muggles dead. He remembers Harry sitting in that courtroom, Sirius's hand on his shoulder, watching the adults decide what story they would tell. He chose wrong then. He ignored the boy. He will not be made a fool twice. Now the debrief is not a private conversation. It is a war council. Harry sits opposite Fudge, shoulders tight, still smelling of graveyard earth and ash. Sirius is at his right, Remus at his left, Dumbledore a calm, terrible presence behind him. McGonagall hovers near the fireplace, jaw set. A quill from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement scratches in the corner, taking every word. Harry speaks, and no one interrupts. The portkey, the dead body of Cedric, the cold voice, the cauldron, the spell, the moment Voldemort touched his wand and the world screamed. Sirius's fingers drum once on the table when Harry describes the Death Eaters unmasking. Remus stares at Fudge when Harry names Lucius Malfoy. Dumbledore adds only what is necessary. Prior mark activity, patterns of disappearances, the old raids that never made it to trial. Pattern interrupt. Fudge does not shout. He asks instead, can anyone corroborate this? In canon, that question is a weapon. Here, it's a lifeline he's grabbing with both hands. Dumbledore lays out the echoes already reaching Hogwarts, the dark mark flaring on Snape's arm, Karkaroff's panicked flight, the strange surge of cursed artifacts reported by auras over the last month. He reminds Fudge quietly, relentlessly, how Pettigrew's testimony proved that the unbelievable can be true, and how the public never forgave the Ministry for trying to bury that. Outside this room, the press is waiting. The Prophet, the Quibbler, even foreign correspondents from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang. They remember the Sirius debacle, the rushed Dementor's kiss order, the way Fudge smiled for cameras while an innocent man rotted. They are not inclined to trust his first denial. So when Fudge emerges, sweat beading at his temples, he does not call Harry mad. He does not call Dumbledore senile. He speaks of credible reports, of grave concerns, of a possible organized dark movement. It's not the word return, but it's not a smear campaign either. Behind that careful language, Dumbledore is already moving. He sends messages through old channels, Phoenix Feather and Patronus Light. The Order of the Phoenix is reactivated before the Prophet's evening edition hits the stands. Known Death Eaters find themselves shadowed by auras and unsmiling hit wizards. At Hogwarts, wards tighten. Hogsmeade weekends are reviewed. Snape is quietly ordered to report every twitch of the mark. Fudge signs the authorizations with a shaking hand. Investigative powers expanded. Azkaban security reviewed. International cooperation requested. He still cannot say, Voldemort is back. Not yet. But he has made a different choice, and because he moves, even half-believing, even afraid, the year that should have been spent destroying Harry's name is instead spent hunting shadows. This is that story. The question now is not whether the Ministry will admit there is a war. It's whether they can act fast enough before the next dead body proves Harry right beyond denial. Order of the Phoenix 2.0, a very different resistance. The headquarters is breathing again. Grimmauld Place is no longer a mausoleum for dead blacks and dead causes. It's a house that wakes up to the scrape of chairs, the clink of teacups, and the low, urgent murmur of people planning a war they still aren't allowed to name. When Dumbledore calls the Order back, it doesn't reform in the shadows of catastrophe. It reforms in the uneasy space between Harry's testimony and the Ministry's denial, when the Prophet still insists Voldemort is gone and yet auras keep vanishing on routine assignments. This is that story. The core is different this time. Sirius is not a fugitive hiding in caves. He's an officially exonerated black heir who can walk into Nocturne Alley in broad daylight and make old Death Eaters flinch. He volunteers as a field operative, the one who takes the most dangerous missions, the one who can turn into a dog and slip through bars, windows, crowds. Remus, no longer half-starved and alone, becomes the strategist at Dumbledore's right hand, the liaison who knows werewolves, goblins, and every disillusioned fringe group the Ministry has pushed to the edges. And Dumbledore? He is still secretive, still burdened, but less isolated. He doesn't have to stare at the map of Britain by himself at 3 a.m, wondering where the next body will fall. There's Sirius pacing, wand in hand. There's Remus, quill scratching, turning scattered reports into patterns. The grief of the First War still sits between them, but action has cut through the grief like a knife. The Peter Pettigrew scandal does something else too. It breaks faith. Young auras who watched Fudge ignore Veritaserum testimony drift toward Grimmauld Place after hours. A clerk from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, eyes ringed with sleeplessness, whispers that she's done filing lies. A pair of recent Hogwarts graduates, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, show up because they read Harry's interview and cannot bear the silence. They are not told everything, but they are told enough. Harry is told more. He is not sworn in as a full member. He is 14, and Remus refuses to pretend that doesn't matter. At Grimmauld Place, gasping, the echo of a green spell still burning behind his eyes. So the training formalizes. Dueling drills in the drawing room. Shield charms in the back garden. Hermione arguing with Kingsley about the ethics of stunning first and asking questions later. Sirius insisting Harry goes to Quidditch practice even on days when the Order's kitchen table is covered in maps and casualty lists, because as he snarls at Dumbledore, he gets to be a kid, or what was the point of any of this? That's the tension that never quite resolves. Protect the boy or prepare the weapon. Give him homework and Hogsmeade, or briefings and contingency plans. What if the only honest choice is both? Grimmauld becomes the answer to that question. Headquarters and home. The same table where Molly Weasley serves stew at 6 becomes a war room at 9, parchments spread over the crumbs. Harry does his essays at one end while Dumbledore and Remus argue softly at the other about giants and prophecies. In the corridor, portraits scream about blood traitors, while in the kitchen, Sirius teaches Hermione how to disarm a man twice her size. The house itself holds the contradiction. Domestic warmth pressed up against whispered strategy. Childhood pressed up against war. And as autumn deepens, every door that opens onto that narrow hallway carries the same unspoken question. How long can this fragile balance last before the war outside kicks it in? Snape's tightrope. Spy, teacher, and reluctant ally. The first time Snape sees them together in the staff room, the air goes dead. Sirius leaning back in a chair that should be his, boots on the table. Remus at the window, pale in the autumn light. And between them, in every line of their conversation, the boy who looks too much like James Potter. Snape stares. For a moment the war is back. The night everything changed is not Halloween but a howling November, when he heard James was dead and Lily was gone and Sirius Black had done it. That story calcified in him for 12 years. Now the Ministry has cleared Black, Pettigrew is in Azkaban, and the truth has cut through the grief like a knife. It does not feel like justice, it feels like theft. What if Sirius had rotted in prison and Lupin had stayed in the shadows? What if Harry Potter had grown up small and frightened in a muggle house, as Dumbledore intended? Snape had made his brittle peace with that world. Instead, he watches Black and Lupin argue quietly over lesson plans and guardianship forms, talking about our kids and Harry's training schedule, while his own promises to Lily sit in his chest like a curse. Outside that room, the war is no longer a rumour. Fudge has been forced, by Veritaserum testimony, by Dumbledore's pressure, to admit that Voldemort may not be dead. The Order of the Phoenix is reactivated years early, and Snape's role shifts overnight. He is no longer the lone double agent Dumbledore leans on in secret. He is one piece on a crowded board. The Ministry watches him with narrowed eyes. Former Death Eaters test his loyalties with half-spoken questions. Inside Order meetings, Sirius's gaze is open hostility. Remus's is wary calculation. Dumbledore keeps saying the same word. Choice. Snape's choice. To keep spying. To keep walking back into the darkness that once owned him. In the classroom, the tension sharpens into something more personal. This Harry is not the underfed, bewildered boy Snape half expected. He is trained. He is confident. He has a wand hand that does not shake when Snape stalks past. Clearly, Potter, Snape says one October afternoon, your godfather's instruction does not extend to basic potion safety. Harry's jaw tightens. Clearly, Professor, my godfather taught me not to poison my classmates on purpose. The class goes silent. No one laughs. They just stare between them, waiting for the explosion. Before, Harry would have swallowed it. Now he knows there are adults who will defend him. Sirius has already stormed one staff meeting over detentions. Remus has quietly asked Dumbledore what exactly he expects Harry to learn from humiliation. Dumbledore, for his part, is juggling fire. He needs Snape close enough to Voldemort's remnants to hear whispers. He needs Sirius and Remus close enough to Harry to keep him alive. Every Order meeting is a controlled detonation. Snape's sarcasm, Sirius's temper, Remus's fraying patience, all circling the boy at the centre of the prophecy. This is that story, the one where the headmaster's great design depends on three men who would rather hex each other than share a strategy. So the shift, when it comes, is small, deniable. A cursed quill smuggled into Harry's bag by a Slytherin hopeful. Ink that carves words into skin. Snape finds it first, tucked under a desk after class. He recognises the spell. He remembers similar toys in the hands of Death Eaters. He could turn it in. He could ignore it. Instead, he burns it wordlessly with a silent spell, ashes vanishing before anyone can see. That night in the staff room, he mentions, too casually, that certain blood ink curses have been circulating, that Harry should be watched. He never looks at Sirius when he says it, but Remus hears the warning. Harry never sees the quill. And somewhere beneath the layers of resentment, a new, unwilling thread is tied between them. What if that tiny, grudging choice is the first crack in a different future? A year without Umbridge, Hogwarts. Under new pressures. By autumn, that tiny, grudging choice has reshaped everything. Cornelius Fudge cannot stand in front of the Wizengamot, with Peter Pettigrew's Veritaserum testimony echoing in every corridor, and pretend Voldemort is dead and gone. He tries. He blusters. He talks about isolated extremists and misunderstood confessions. But the words land flat. Too many people stared at the rat animagus in chains. Too many heard him describe the night everything changed. So when the question of Hogwarts comes up, the old canon choice is suddenly impossible. How does a minister publicly deny Voldemort's return and appoint Dolores Umbridge to silence Dumbledore, when the record already shows a Death Eater survived and served the Dark Lord for years? What if the smear campaign simply can't gain traction because the lie is too obvious now? Fudge hesitates. That hesitation saves the school from pink cardigans and blood quills, but it doesn't save it from fear. Hogwarts in Harry's 5th year is not a playground for a petty bureaucrat, ringed with detection wards. Filch mutters ringed with detection wards. Filch mutters about confiscated fanged frisbees, but Harry can hear the new note in his voice. The war is coming back, and even Filch is afraid. The Great Hall feels different. The enchanted ceiling shows storms more often. Hushed conversations break off when professors pass. There is no official denial now, only official uncertainty. The silence between classes is heavier than any decree. Pattern interrupt. Umbridge never arrives. Instead, Dumbledore moves first. He calls Harry, Hermione, and Ron to his office. Fawkes watches from his perch, head tilted, as Dumbledore speaks in a low, unadorned voice about preparation, about choice, about children who will not stay children for long. Sirius and Remus sit on either side of Harry, not as distant Order members, but as guardians whose grief has already cut through the grief like a knife. "What if," Dumbledore asks quietly, "we did not pretend you are safe, but trained you to survive?" Out of that question comes something Umbridge would have banned on sight, an official defense association. Not a secret rebellion in the room of requirement, but a sanctioned student battalion in everything but name. Dumbledore signs the charter. McGonagall oversees rosters. Mad-Eye Moody, this time the real one, appears twice a month to demonstrate spells that leave first years shaking. Harry is its commander. He doesn't call himself that. On parchment, he is student coordinator. In practice, he stands at the front of the room of requirement as it shifts into a stone-walled training hall and the school stares back at him. Hufflepuffs who lost relatives. Slytherins whose parents sit under suspicion. Ravenclaws who want every counter-curse memorized before the first real duel. They are not rebelling against a toad in lace. They are bracing for war. Without Umbridge to unite them in hatred, unity grows from something harsher. Shared dread, shared drills, the knowledge that Death Eaters are not a story, but a timetable. Spells crack through the air. Shields bloom and shatter. Hermione refines lesson plans with Remus. Sirius prowls the edges, correcting Harry's stance, forcing him to meet every frightened eye. Hogwarts stops being a sanctuary. It becomes a fortress in training. Stone walls, layered wards, teenagers learning to cast without screaming. And at the center of it, for the first time, stands a student resistance that is not hiding from adults, but backed by them. This is that story. The question is, when the Ministry finally panics and tries to reassert control, what happens to a fortress that has already learned to fight? The Department of Mysteries. Without a manipulated Harry, the fortress learns to fight. The mind must follow. Spring at Hogwarts, 5th year. The corridors hum with whispers of war and Ministry decrees, but in the room of requirement, Harry stands with his eyes closed while Remus's voice cuts through the silence. Again? He shows you something you want. You question it. You shut the door. This is not Snape's bitter, humiliating occlumency. This is training born of trust. What if, instead of being thrown into a dungeon and screamed at, Harry had been taught early that his mind is a battlefield? He remembers the first time the scar burned that year, the flash of a snake, the taste of blood. Sirius and Remus didn't dismiss it. They sat him down at Grimmauld, firelight flickering, and told him the truth. Voldemort can push, but Harry can push back. The choice is not between believing every vision and ignoring them all. The choice is to treat them as weapons, not prophecies. So when the vision comes, the night everything changed in canon, Sirius bound, tortured, the echo of a scream in the Department of Mysteries. Harry's breath stutters. His fists clench. The spell of panic almost takes him. Almost. Because this Harry has rehearsed that moment, with Hermione drilling questions into him until they're muscle memory, with Remus walking him through worst-case scenarios until the fear doesn't cut through the grief like a knife, but lands on something solid. Check. Verify. Never go alone. He doesn't run for the Thestrals. He runs for the mirrors Sirius gave him, the secure flue in McGonagall's office, the order channels they built because they all remembered what it cost when children were left to improvise a war. Grimmauld Place, he snaps into the mirror, heart hammering. Padfoot, answer. Sirius appears, rumpled, very much not dead, with Creature glowering in the background. Remus is behind him, wand already in hand. Harry, what's wrong? The vision is wrong. Or worse, it's bait. In that instant, the entire board changes. Voldemort's tactic, plant an image, drag an isolated boy into a trap, slams into a network instead. The Order doesn't dismiss Harry's warning. They treat it as intelligence. Moody snarls about traps. Kingsley maps routes. Dumbledore listens, eyes hard. Does Voldemort pivot? Aim at someone else Harry loves? Tries to snatch Arthur or a Weasley child or even a squad of Auras to lure the Order as a whole? Maybe. But this time the answer is not 6 teenagers in a stolen corridor. It's a coordinated strike. They still go to the Department of Mysteries. Harry insists. The prophecy is about him, and they've trained for this. But he doesn't go as a panicked son chasing a dying godfather. He goes as the point of a small unit. Harry, Hermione, Ron, Neville, Ginny, Luna, D. Of veterans who move in formation, shields overlapping, signals pre-agreed. Behind them, adults. Tonks and Kingsley on one flank, Remus and Sirius on the other. Dumbledore in reserve. The battle is still chaos. Spells ricochet, glass shatters, the veil whispers. But when Bellatrix's curse arcs towards Sirius, Harry doesn't just stare and scream. He's drilled that angle. Hermione yanks Sirius sideways with a banishing charm. Remus slams a shield between them and the archway. Harry's Expelliarmus hits Bellatrix half a heartbeat before Kingsley's stunner. Sirius goes down, shoulder ruined, ribs broken, almost lost. Not dead. Voldemort appears. The atrium duel still tears the night open. But the psychological victory he wanted, to break the boy with one more body through the veil, never lands. Harry walks out of the ministry with Sirius alive on a stretcher, the prophecy intact in his memory, and a different question burning in his mind. If Voldemort can't win by breaking him, what will he try to destroy instead? Prophecy in the open. Harry learns his fate on his terms. The office is not empty this time. No shattered instruments, no boy abandoned in the wreckage of a war he never chose. Just Harry, Sirius, and Remus sitting shoulder to shoulder in front of Dumbledore's desk, the air thick with the memory of the atrium duel and the prophecy that did not break him. This is that story. Sirius had not let it go. The night everything changed at the ministry, he came back to Grimmauld Place on a stretcher and still argued. Harry deserves the truth, he rasped. Remus backed him, quiet but unyielding. What if Voldemort tries again and Harry is blind to why? What if the boy walks into the next trap because the adults who swore to protect him kept the most important spell of his life locked in a dusty orb? Dumbledore listened. For once, the old habit of secrecy met a united front. Godfather and Guardian on one side, Headmaster on the other, and Harry in the middle of the room, staring between them, hearing the word choice over and over. So Dumbledore changes the stage, not a lonely midnight summons. Late afternoon. Sunlight on the stone floor. Fawkes dozing, not screaming. Tea on the table, untouched. Sirius's knee pressed against Harry's on one side. Remus's steady hand on his other shoulder. Harry, Dumbledore begins, and his voice is not grand, not distant. There is a prophecy about you, about Voldemort. I should have told you sooner. He does not show him the whole memory in the Department of Mysteries. He gives him the words, slowly, each line landing in the held silence of the office, the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord, marked as his equal. Neither can live while the other survives. The phrases cut through the grief like a knife, but they do not cut him alone. Harry hears them and feels the floor tilt. For one wild second he is back in the graveyard, Cedric dead beside him, Voldemort reborn, the world narrowed to green light and screaming. Of course there was always going to be a reason. Of course the war was never random. So it has to be me, he says, because someone has to say it. In the end, Sirius swears under his breath. Remus flinches. Dumbledore closes his eyes. Yes, the headmaster answers. But not as a weapon I point. As a person who chooses. In canon, this is where Harry would explode. Rage smashed silver instruments. The sense that every adult in his life has lied until something inside him finally breaks. Here, the anger is still there. It burns hot. It tastes of every funeral and every scar. But it has witnesses. I should have known, Harry says, voice raw. You knew since I was a baby, and you just waited. Sirius leans forward. And I'm the one who told him that was wrong, he cuts in, eyes on Dumbledore, not Harry. That's why we're here now, not next year. You're not carrying this in the dark, pup. Not ever again. Remus doesn't offer platitudes, he offers structure. We treat it as intel, he says. Not a sentence. Prophecies are vague on purpose. Power to vanquish doesn't say how. It doesn't say alone. We build around that. Training, research, Horcrux theory, strategy. The word strategy steadies Harry more than comfort ever could. If the universe has decided he's the one on the board, then he will not be a piece moved by someone else's hand. He asks questions that, in another life, would have festered unspoken. Why me and not Neville? Could Voldemort twist the wording? What happens if I refuse? Each one lands is taken seriously, dissected like a complex spell. By the time the sun has shifted past the window, the shape of his future has changed, but so has the shape of his support. No smashed trinkets, no running out into the night. Just 3 marauders and a headmaster, sketching war plans on old parchment. They end with a pact. If this is the path fate carved, then Harry will walk it armed to the teeth. Occlumency, dueling, curse-breaking, every weapon knowledge can give. And never alone. Sirius promises he'll be at his back. Remus promises he'll be at his side. Dumbledore, chastened, promises transparency. And somewhere beyond the stone walls of the castle, Voldemort moves his pieces, unaware that the boy he marked has just turned from target into tactician. Horcrux is hunted early. Dumbledore shares the dark secret. The chamber is open and full of whispers. Not the Chamber of Secrets this time, but Dumbledore's office, high above the sleeping castle. Moonlight on silver instruments. Fawkes breathing slowly on his perch. 3 adults and 1 boy gathered around a low table, and the air feels heavier than any spell. This is the night everything changed. Dumbledore steeples his fingers, blue eyes on Harry first, then on Sirius and Remus. I promised transparency, he says quietly. That promise demands I share with you a theory I once kept to myself. Perhaps for too long. Harry's stomach tightens. He can feel Sirius beside him, tense, coiled. Remus's hand rests on the arm of his chair, white-knuckled, as if he already knows this is going to cut through the grief like a knife. What if Voldemort did not merely cling to life by accident? Dumbledore asks. What if he made himself difficult to kill? Sirius stares at him. We watched him fall, he says, voice rough. James is dead. Lily is dead. He was a wraith in the Albanian forests. How much more difficult can you mean? Fragments, Dumbledore answers. 1 word. It lands like a stone. I believe Tom Riddle tore his soul apart, hid the pieces in objects, anchors that bind him to this world even when his body is destroyed. Silence. The ticking of a silver instrument becomes deafening. Harry swallows. You mean, he did it on purpose? He chose this. The thought makes his skin crawl. This isn't an accident of dark magic gone wrong. This is design. Horcruxes, Remus whispers, the old textbook term dragged from some dusty corner of memory. His face drains of colour. That's not a theory, Albus. That's an abomination. Sirius's chair scrapes back. He's on his feet, pacing, hands in his hair. He murdered James and Lily, and that wasn't even the end of it. He carved himself up so he could come back again and again. The horror in his voice is raw, but beneath it there's a grim, dawning recognition. Of course Voldemort survived Azkaban, trials, the first fall. Of course he keeps slipping the noose. Dumbledore nods once. Wormtail's escape in another timeline would have given him a body sooner. Here, his return will be slower, less supported. The Ministry is not our enemy. You, he looks at Sirius and Remus, are capable guardians. That changes my... Trust calculus. Pattern interrupt. Dumbledore, who always hoarded burdens, is choosing not to. I will not hunt these Horcruxes alone, Nine, he says. We plan together. We move early. We dismantle his immortality before this war ignites in full. Harry's heart hammers. You want me involved? Not a question. Not really. Gradually, Dumbledore replies, you will learn occlumency, curse-breaking, magical theory. When the time comes, you will understand what we are destroying and why. But you will not be sent into the dark with half-truths. Remus leans forward, voice low. What do you suspect already? The diary you faced in your second year, Dumbledore says. I'm nearly certain that was one. There will be more. Objects tied to Hogwarts, to his past, to the darkest chapters of our history. Sirius stops pacing. His eyes meet Remus's, then Dumbledore's. Then we start now. Grimauld's library. Ministry records. Old Death Eater haunts. We find them before he does. Remus nods, jaw set. Research, reconnaissance, protections around Harry and Hermione tightened. No more waiting for him to make the first move. Dumbledore extends his hand, not as a headmaster, but as a man entering a pact. Agreed. We strike at his soul before he regains his strength. Sirius clasps it. Remus follows. 3 hands. One choice. The decision is simple and terrifying. They will hunt Horcruxes now, while the world still believes the war is over. And somewhere in the darkness beyond Hogwarts, something that once was Tom Riddle shivers, tethered to hidden anchors it believes unassailable, unaware that its immortality has just become the primary target of a very different story. This is that story. The locket, the ring, and a very different cave. The cave is not the beginning. The beginning is an old shack and an older ring, and a choice Dumbledore does not make alone. When he calls Sirius and Remus to his office, the air is thick with dust and war maps. The ring lies on his desk, ugly and heavy, the stone in its centre drinking in the candlelight. Harry isn't there. He only hears about this night in fragments later, but it is still the night everything changed for Dumbledore. What if I'm wrong about my own limits? The headmaster asks quietly. What if my curiosity proves unwise? Sirius stares at the ring like it might leap up and bite. Remus watches Dumbledore instead, catching the tremor in his hand. They remember the diary. They remember how close Harry came to dead in the chamber. They do not intend to watch another adult fall alone. So they go with him to the gaunt shack. 3 wands, 1 plan. Remus layers containment spells around the ring. Latin murmured through clenched teeth, while Sirius stands between Dumbledore and the warped table, ready to physically drag him back if he has to. Dumbledore still reaches. Of course he does, but when the curse explodes from the ring, it hits a web of protections instead of bare skin. The magic screams against Remus's wards, black veins spidering through the air before lashing at Dumbledore's arm. This time, Sirius is already there, slamming his wand down, snarling a severing charm that cuts through the grief like a knife. The curse takes, but it is blunted, slowed, trapped in a ring of fire, and runes Remus carves into the rotten floor. Dumbledore staggers. He is weakened. He is not doomed. Months later, Harry stands on a rock in the middle of a black lake and watches his future in the water. The cave is cold. The silence is worse. It presses into his ears until he can hear nothing but his own pulse and the soft splash of Sirius's boots beside him. Remus did not come. The full moon was too close, and they all knew better than to gamble with that. Dumbledore chose Sirius for this mission, and Harry can feel the weight of that choice in every breath. 3 again. Dumbledore, Sirius, Harry. The basin glows with that sickly green potion, and this is where, in another story, Dumbledore would drink alone. Here he doesn't get the chance. We share it, Sirius says, jaw set, or we don't do it. Dumbledore's refusal is immediate, but Harry has been raised by marauders. He and Sirius move as one. Shielding charms, measured doses, a rota, Dumbledore still drinks the most. He still breaks first, begging, screaming, seeing dead faces only he can name. But Sirius takes a portion, shoulders some of the hallucinations until he's shaking, whispering James's name. Harry forces down a mouthful when Dumbledore starts to fail, his throat closing around liquid terror. He learns what dark magic really costs by feeling it burn his own veins. When the Inferi rise, it is not a desperate one-wand ring of fire. It is a coordinated assault. Dumbledore's flames roar across the cavern. Sirius's blasting curses shatter the front ranks. Harry drives them back with Patronus light that turns the water silver. He is not just brave. He is precise, counting spells, tracking positions, listening for Dumbledore's breathing. On the rock outside, with the locket heavy in his pocket and Sirius half collapsed beside him, Harry understands something new. This war will not be won by heroics in isolation. It will be won by teams who refuse to let each other fall. He also understands something else as he helps Dumbledore to his feet and sees the lingering shadow on the old man's arm. The ring has wounded him. The cave has drained him. Horcruxes are already bleeding, and Horcruxes are already bleeding, and waiting back in Britain, one more artifact is waking, ready to turn their next mission into something far worse. Draco, the Tower, and a headmaster who might live. The Tower is not quiet this year. It hums. Wards layered over wards, order sentries folded into the staff, corridors that report footsteps to paintings that answer to Sirius Black and Remus Lupin as much as to the headmaster. Hogwarts has become a semi-fortress, a school in name and a barracks in truth. And into this place, Voldemort still sends a boy, Draco Malfoy. Pale, proud, terrified. The mission is the same: kill Dumbledore or die trying. What if that order lands in a castle where the old man is less cursed, where the war is already open, where the children are no longer as unprotected as he believes? Because the ring still burned him, but Hermione and Harry saw the wound. Snape bound it, Sirius snarled over it, and the order rearranged itself around that blackened hand. Dumbledore still leaves with Harry to hunt a Horcrux, but this time he drinks less, paces himself, shares more. He returns to the astronomy tower drained, yes, but not dead on his feet. His magic doesn't flicker, it coils, waiting. The night everything changed in canon, he was alone with a boy and a wand he would not raise. Here he steps out of the emerald light with contingency already in motion. A Patronus message streaks ahead of him. Lupin and Tonks are on the 5th floor staircase before the first Death Eater even touches the grounds. McGonagall has the Gryffindor and Slytherin dormitories sealed. This is that story. Draco still finds him on the tower. The wand in his hand still shakes. The words still tumble out about his mother, about the dark mark, about the cabinet in the room of requirement. But when Dumbledore says quietly, "I can protect you," he is not stalling for a man who has not arrived. He is synchronizing. Because somewhere beneath them, Severus Snape is running out of time. Does Narcissa still demand the unbreakable vow? She has more reason than ever. The castle is a fortress. The order is active and failure feels inevitable. In this timeline, she grips his hand harder, whispers more fiercely, and Snape still binds himself. He will watch over Draco. He will protect him, and if Draco cannot complete the task, he will. That promise sits on his chest now, like a weight of lead. Every step up the tower stairs is a choice sharpened to a point. Kill the only man who ever trusted him, or let the boy die and his cover die with him. Pattern interrupt. What if Dumbledore refuses both options? He does not freeze Draco's body this time. He disarms him in a blur of silent spellwork, wand ripped from the boy's fingers before Draco can even gasp. He doesn't let himself be cornered against the battlements. He circles, drawing Draco with him, keeping the boy between him and the door where Death Eaters will appear. "Severus will not kill me," he says, not as a plea but as a declaration. "But you may have to watch me die. Or not." Branch 1. The Fake Death. With Lupin and Tonks already fighting on the stairs, with Sirius triggering pre-arranged alarms from the staff room, Dumbledore can stage something brutal and convincing. A blast of green that hits a transfigured double, a body hurled from the tower while the real headmaster vanishes under a layered disillusionment and a blood-slicked glamour. More people are in on the plan. Remus, Minerva, maybe even Harry and Hermione, sworn to a secrecy that cuts through the grief like a knife. Branch 2. No death at all. Snape reaches the top, sees Draco disarmed but alive, sees Dumbledore standing, wand raised, eyes hard. The unbreakable vow screams in his veins. Instead of Avada Kedavra, he turns that pressure outward, hexing the other Death Eaters, blasting Fenrir from the tower, firing curses so vicious they look indistinguishable from betrayal. In the chaos, his true allegiance cracks open years early. Either way, the tower becomes a battleground, not a scaffold. Spells arc against the stars. Harry and Hermione, invisible under a shared cloak, stare through the wind and smoke as their headmaster refuses to die on Voldemort's terms. The war does not end here, but the story of who falls and when has already been rewritten. A war in the open, Hogwarts as a stronghold, not a victim. The smoke over the astronomy tower doesn't drift away. It settles, it thickens. It hangs over Hogwarts as a warning and a promise. This is not a school waiting to be attacked anymore. This is a fortress sharpening its walls. With Pettigrew exposed years earlier, with Voldemort's return confirmed instead of whispered about, the war comes into the open fast. No more pretending. No more comforting lies. Dumbledore does not stand alone in hidden corridors. He stands at the staff table and tells the truth. The Great Hall falls into a stunned silence as he names Horcruxes, Death Eaters, and a ministry too afraid to move. Behind him, Sirius and Remus stare out over the students, not as distant Order members, but as Harry's guardians and open defenders of the school. McGonagall's jaw is a line of steel. Flitwick's wand is already in his hand. Even Snape, pale and furious, does not argue the basic fact. The Dark Lord is back, and Hogwarts will not be caught unprepared a second time. So the castle changes. The Room of Requirement becomes an official training hall, not a secret rebellion. Older students drill in rotating groups, their spells cracking through the air under the watchful eyes of auras and professors. Stunning spells, shield charms, anti-disapparition jinx theory. They learn how to move as units, how to fall back, how to carry the injured. It feels less like school and more like a barracks, and that truth cuts through the grief like a knife. Younger children are not fed comforting stories. They are given plans. Hagrid walks them through evacuation routes into the Forbidden Forest. Madame Pomfrey rehearses mass casualty protocols with a calm that makes some of them want to scream. The choice is brutal but honest. Know the danger or die ignorant. Harry stands at the centre of this shifting ground, a bridge no one else can be. He's the boy who lived, the teenager who trains, and the son of two marauders who refuse to keep him in the dark. When Dumbledore and the Order debate strategy in Grimmauld Place, Harry and Hermione sit at the table, not outside the door. Harry takes what he hears back to the common room and turns it into action, organising defence groups, pairing anxious first years with steady seventh years, making sure no one feels as alone as he once did in Privet Drive. What if the DA isn't a secret club this time, but the backbone of a student militia? What if Hogwarts itself chooses to fight? The Death Eaters feel the shift. Their old tactics, masks in the dark, a poisoned teacher here, a cursed object there, hit walls they didn't expect. Wards are layered, checked, and checked again. Polyjuice infiltrations are met with Blood Ward identity checks and legitimacy sweeps. So they adapt. Fewer surprise attacks. More open assaults on Hogsmeade. More pressure in the Wizengamot, where Fudge's shaken reputation is a battlefield of its own. When the final battle comes to Hogwarts in this timeline, it will not be a desperate last stand by an underinformed school. It will be two prepared armies colliding around ancient stone and living children, each side knowing exactly what it is walking into. The question is no longer whether Hogwarts will fight. The question is what that choice will cost. Harry, Sirius, and Remus on the run, a family Horcrux hunt. So when Harry turns 17 in this timeline, the question isn't whether Hogwarts will fight, it's whether Hogwarts can survive him staying. They sit in the kitchen at Grimmauld Place, maps and old parchments spread between half-drunk mugs of tea. The war is no longer theory. Horcrux is not an abstract word Dumbledore whispers in his office. It's a dead locket on the table, leaking cold that cuts through the grief like a knife. Harry stares at it and knows, if Voldemort learns what he's hunting, the school becomes bait. What if he stays, lets term begin, pretends to be a student while dark magic coils closer? What if one mistake means Death Eaters apparating into the Great Hall, not for conquest, but for him? He can see it too clearly. Children screamed, stones shattered, McGonagall dead on the floor because he clung to the illusion of normal. This doesn't happen at Hogwarts, Harry says. His voice is flat, final. I won't turn the castle into a target more than it already is. In canon, he would have walked out with only Ron and Hermione. In this story, he doesn't get the chance. You're not going anywhere without us, Sirius says, chair screeching back. No hesitation, no question. You're my son. The word drops between them heavier than any spell. Remus doesn't argue. He just folds his hands, exhausted and steady, and says, operationally he's right. If you disappear, the Death Eaters will tear Hogwarts apart trying to find you. If we all disappear, we can control the field. 5 of them. Harry, Hermione, Ron, Sirius, Remus. A mobile strike team instead of 3 teenagers camping in the cold. Youth and experience in the same tent, the same cramped safe house, the same forest clearing where they plan how to dismantle us all. The arguments change. Fewer petty explosions about radios and Horcrux books. More low, sharp fights about risk. Sirius wants to hit fast, loud, leave the enemy reeling. Remus wants reconnaissance, contingencies, exit routes. Harry stands between them, feeling the weight of every choice. When they go for the locket at the cave, it isn't 2 people in a boat. It's a coordinated insertion. Remus anchoring the enchantments on the shore, Hermione tracking the wards, Sirius ready to blast through Inferi while Ron covers the retreat. Harry is the one who decides when they push forward, when they pull back. Around a campfire in a nameless wood, they plan Gringotts. The cup in Bellatrix's vault is no longer a desperate improvisation. It's a heist. Polyjuice, decoy curses, Remus walking them through goblin response patterns he studied in old ministry files, Sirius outlining fallback rendezvous points with a soldier's precision. Ron voices the ugly question. If one of us gets trapped inside, who do we leave? The silence after hangs heavy. No one answers. Nagini is worse. A living Horcrux, always at Voldemort's side. They sketch routes through Hogwarts corridors they all know by heart, debating whether to split the team. Remus argues for division of labour, Sirius for staying glued together. Harry listens to them fight over his life and realises he has become the deciding vote in his own family's survival. This is that story, the one where he isn't alone in a tent, but also isn't spared the burden of leading the people he loves into the dark. On the night everything changed for this final phase of the war, they stand at the edge of the Forbidden Forest. The castle glows in the distance, already under siege. Behind them, the path to disapparition. Ahead, the path to Nagini, the last Horcrux, and Voldemort himself. Sirius squeezes Harry's shoulder once, fierce and wordless. Remus meets Hermione's eyes, pride and terror warring in his. Ron swallows hard, freckles stark against his skin, and says, "Well, we go together, yeah?" They all nod. No one pretends they'll all walk back out. Family, by blood and by choice, steps forward into the trees. The war is about to demand its final price. Losses rewritten. Who dies, who lives, and why it hurts more. The forest swallows them. Branches claw at cloaks, breath fogs in the cold, and the air carries that electric taste Harry now associates with one thing only. War. Sirius is alive beside him. That one fact has already rewritten the casualty list a dozen times over. In this story, Sirius never falls through the veil in a burst of orange spell light. There is no Department of Mysteries duel where Bellatrix's curse catches him off balance, because Sirius and Remus never let a half-trained Harry walk into that trap at 15. They expose Fudge earlier, drag the war into the open on their terms, not Voldemort's. The night everything changed in this timeline isn't a godson watching his godfather die. It's a godfather choosing to live long enough to be inconvenient. But magic does not let you cheat the balance forever. Someone else dies in the space he would have occupied. An aura in the corridor that should have held Sirius. A Weasley cousin who takes the curse meant for the reckless Black who finally learned caution. Harry knows their names. He can list them. He does sometimes in the dark, as if recitation were a spell to keep the dead from slipping away. Remus walks into the final battle different too. Not the worn, half-detached man of canon, but a professor who kept his job, a werewolf whose condition is public, normalized, legislated for because Hermione would not shut up in the Wizengamot. He drinks wolfsbane on schedule. He has a salary, a home, a family that refuses to let him vanish into martyrdom. So what if that stability means he survives the last stand where Canon Remus fell? What if, when the dust clears, he's on his knees in the Great Hall, shaking, alive, staring at bodies that are not his? Tonks is one of those questions the war answers cruelly. In some versions of this AU, she lives because Remus never pushes her away, never leaves her vulnerable and alone. In this one, she dies covering a breach in the castle wall, her hair burned to ash white, grinning through blood as she hurls one last spell. Remus gets to live with that. Love did not save her. It only made the grief cut through the grief like a knife. Dumbledore still dies. Different hill, same sacrifice. Without a cursed ring eating his hand, he falls orchestrating a trap for Voldemort that goes half right, half wrong. Snape still kills him, but this time it is in front of a watching Wizengamot, a staged execution that cements Snape's place as Voldemort's man. The choice is the same. The witnesses are not. Fred. Sometimes Sirius's early political maneuvering means the twins never open a joke shop. They open a logistics arm for the Order instead. In this war, the explosion that should have taken Fred takes Percy, who is standing where Fred would have been. The Weasleys break in a different pattern. Harry feels it like a physical weight. He saved one brother by redirecting the story, and the cost landed on another. Snape's death comes later, not in a boathouse but on a courtroom floor, memories spilling out under Veritaserum as the world finally hears the whole, ugly truth. Harry watches, jaw clenched, and understands that being right about Snape never meant the man deserved this. Through it all, Sirius and Remus at his back do not spare Harry the central horror. Leadership means choosing which risks to take, knowing some will die because of you. He signs orders, he approves raids, he sends people he loves into danger. Sometimes they come back, sometimes they don't. This is that story. The one where more people are trained, more plans are made, more adults survive long enough to help. And yet the bodies still line the Great Hall, rearranged but not erased. The pain doesn't vanish. It redistributes. Bonds are stronger, so when they snap, they scream. And as Harry stands among the dead, one question will not leave him. If he had made just one different choice, who would be standing here instead? The final battle. A chosen one who was never alone. He makes the choice at dawn. Smoke hangs over Hogwarts, thick and bitter. The castle is a maze of barricades and blue-white spellfire, but it is not chaos. Not this time. Students move in units Harry helped design, shield teams at the stairwells, hexcasters on the balconies, runners darting messages between professors and Order members. McGonagall and Kingsley hold the main gates. Tonks and Bill Weasley guard the secret passages. The war has come home, and the home is ready. Around him, commanders argue in low. Urgent voices. Hermione traces routes with quick, ink-stained fingers. Ron adjusts the rotation of the younger years to keep them away from the worst of it. This is that story. The one where the chosen one is not a lone boy stumbling into battle, but the center of a strategy years in the making. And yet the question from earlier will not leave him. If he chooses wrong now, who dies instead? Pattern interrupt. The calm shatters when Voldemort's voice rolls over the grounds, amplified and cold, promising mercy if Harry surrenders, promising slaughter if he doesn't. The silence afterward is worse than the threat. It settles over the hall, heavy and dead. Harry knows what it means. He has known since Dumbledore showed him the Horcrux in his own scar, since Snape, pressed hard by Sirius and Remus in a brutally honest, closed-door meeting, reluctantly revealed the full wording of the prophecy. The boy who lived must die. The night everything changed was not Godric's Hollow. It was the day his guardians decided he would hear the truth, no matter how much it cut through the grief like a knife. He finds them in a side chamber, both already moving toward him, as if they felt the choice settle in his bones. No, Sirius says first. Just that. A raw, broken spell of a word. Remus stares at Harry's face and understands. It's him or everyone, Harry says, voice shaking but steady. You trained me for this. All of this. But this part, this was always mine. They argue. Of course they do. Sirius offers plans, bargains, madness. Remus demands alternatives, runs through every contingency they ever drilled. What if they try a decoy? What if Harry hides and they keep fighting? What if the prophecy is wrong? Harry listens. Then he does something canon Harry never could. He answers with years of tactical thought, not blind faith. He points out the patterns in Voldemort's magic, the way the killing curse rebounds on sacrificial protections, the way Pettigrew's capture proved that truth and planning can corner even the slipperiest enemy. He is not walking into the forest because he is out of options. He is walking in because he has calculated the cost. "I'm not alone," he tells them when the words finally run out. "You made sure I never was. That's why this works." Sirius pulls him into a hug so fierce it hurts. Remus presses his forehead to Harry's and whispers every practical instruction he can't stop giving. "Drop the wand if they try to disarm you. Don't look away. Remember who you are. Their love is not a chain. It is armor. The forest is dark, but he does not feel abandoned." The resurrection stone turns in his fingers, and when his parents appear, Sirius and Remus are there too. Not as strangers dragged from death at the last second, but as echoes of the men who raised him. They walk at his side, silent, until Voldemort's clearing opens ahead. This confrontation is not a fluke of instinct. Harry has spent years studying Voldemort's weaknesses, his reliance on fear, his contempt for bonds, the way his soul anchors can be used against him. Even as he lets the curse hit, even as he falls, he is thinking ahead to the moment he will stand again. And when he does, back in the Great Hall, wand raised, crowd watching, he calls Voldemort by his given name and dismantles him in front of everyone, not with a lucky Expelliarmus, but with coordinated strikes that trigger the protections and curses they've spent a year weaving into the very stones of Hogwarts. Voldemort dies because Harry was loved, trained, believed. Because a family refused to lie to him. Because in this version of the story, the Chosen One was never alone. But victory has a price, and the next section will ask, when the war is over, what kind of world did they actually win? After the war, a wizarding world that grew up faster. The war ends in daylight, not with cheering, but with the stunned silence of people who have run out of fear. The smoke is still hanging over Hogwarts, the stones still humming with the echo of the last spell, when the question begins to spread through the crowd. What if we refuse to go back to how things were? Because this time, they remember. They remember the Sirius Black scandal, the night everything changed for the Ministry. They remember that the same institution that threw an innocent man into Azkaban without a trial also spent years denying Voldemort's return. That double shock cuts through the grief like a knife. So when the Wizengamot reconvenes, it isn't business as usual. Dementors are removed from Azkaban's gates. Independent oversight committees are written into law. No witch or wizard can be imprisoned without a full, recorded trial. The minister's emergency powers are slashed, term limits carved into parchment as if they're warding runes against another fudge. Harry watches this happen from the gallery more than once. Not as a political prop, but as a witness. He sits between Sirius and Hermione, Remus on the other side, and the cameras don't just catch the scar on his forehead. They catch the way Sirius's hand closes around his wrist when testimonies about Azkaban get too vivid. They catch Hermione leaning forward, furious and bright, arguing for werewolf rights and house elf protections in the same breath as aura reform. The public doesn't see a tragic, isolated hero. They see the center of a visible, messy, beloved family that fought the war together and refuses to disappear now that it's over. Sirius and Remus refuse too. Retirement was never really an option. Instead, they help rebuild the bones of magical defense itself. In this version of the story, the Aura Office doesn't just patch its losses, it starts over. A new training program rises in the old Department of Mysteries dueling chamber, co-directed by a war hero who broke out of Azkaban and a werewolf who survived every full moon the world threw at him. They drill recruits in ethics as hard as they drill them in spell work. They bring in Muggle-born lecturers. They teach Patronuses in the first month, not the fourth year. Sometimes Sirius guest lectures at Hogwarts, swaggering into the Great Hall to talk about criminal law and the cost of blind obedience. Remus returns to the classroom more quietly, defense against the dark arts, finally his for longer than a single cursed year. Together they turn survival tactics into curriculum. and Snape. In this timeline, he lives. He walks out of the war with his cover intact and his body failing, Nagini's venom slowed by potions, and Hermione's desperate research. His role as a spy is undeniable now. Pensive memories and captured correspondence make sure of that. The public grudgingly acknowledges him as a double agent who kept children alive. The Order remembers the man who passed them information that saved entire families. But acknowledgement is not absolution. His years of cruelty at Hogwarts don't evaporate under the glow of heroism. His relationship with Harry never quite heals. There are conversations, sharp and halting. Harry thanks him for what he did for Lily. Snape admits once that Harry is not his father. They reach a fragile, brittle truce. Respect without warmth. Years later, when the war is a history unit and not a headline, Harry stands on the edge of the Black family orchard behind a rebuilt Grimmauld Place. He is older now. The scar has faded to a pale, silvery line. Children are flying on battered brooms, screaming with the kind of joy that doesn't flinch at sudden noises. He's been an aura. He's taught guest seminars at Hogwarts. He's sat on reform committees that rewrote the laws which once condemned Sirius. Every path he took was a choice, not a desperate attempt to fill a void. Because he never had to figure out who he was entirely alone. In the end, he chooses something quieter, a hybrid life. Part-time aura instructor in Sirius and Remus's program, part-time advocate working with Hermione on legislation that protects the next generation before they ever see a battlefield. He goes home at night to family dinners that are too loud, to Remus's worn books and Sirius's terrible record collection, to godchildren who know him as Uncle Harry before they know him as the Chosen One. The war made him a symbol. His family made him a person. And in this world that grew up faster, that might be the most radical victory of all. Because this is that story. The one where the boy who lived also gets to live well. And the next question is simple and terrifying. When the legends are still walking the halls, how do the children who grew up in their shadow write a story that belongs to them? Canon versus AU. Harry. Who do we lose? Who do we gain? So what does that actually do to Harry Potter? Not the legend, the boy. In canon, Harry is forged in a cupboard. Resilience born from neglect. The way he flinches from praise because it feels undeserved. The way he stares at adults and waits for the disappointment to fall. He survives a childhood where home is a threat, not a refuge, and that warps him into someone who will walk into the Forbidden Forest dead-eyed, convinced his death is the only way to keep anyone else safe. He learns early that authority fails him. The Dursleys starve him. Teachers ignore him. The Ministry smears him. Even Dumbledore keeps him in the dark until the prophecy cuts through the grief like a knife. So canon Harry's instinct is simple and brutal. Don't wait for help. Run at the danger yourself. Chamber of Secrets, Department of Mysteries, the Forest. Again and again, he throws his body between the spell and the people he loves. That gives him a raw, scrappy underdog energy. He's the boy who had to claw for every scrap of kindness, who argues with Snape, screams at Dumbledore, refuses to bow to Voldemort even when he's shaking. His defiance has teeth because it's been sharpened on years of being dismissed and locked away. This is that story. A child weaponized by neglect who still chooses to be kind. But what if the night everything changed was not Halloween 1981, but third year, when the truth comes out and Sirius and Remus never let go again? In this AU, Harry grows up in a house where love is loud and constant, where the adults apologize when they're wrong, where strategy is a dinner table conversation, not a secret in the headmaster's office. Here, confidence is nurtured, not cobbled together. The Marauder curriculum means he doesn't just react, he plans. He thinks in formations, fallback positions, escape routes. He trains with warriors and debates ethics with Hermione until the candles burn low. He leads, but he does it collaboratively, eyes flicking to his friends, trusting them to hold the line beside him instead of behind him. So what do we lose? That desperate, feral edge. The boy who expects to be abandoned and therefore volunteers for every suicide mission, because what is one more person who won't be missed? We lose the particular flavor of defiance that comes from spitting in the face of adults who have already written you off. And what do we gain? A hero who doesn't have to unlearn abuse just to accept a hug. Someone who can build healthy relationships with Ron, with Ginny, with the DA, because he isn't waiting for the betrayal. He isn't fighting only for a world he's been promised. He's fighting for a home he already knows. Grimmauld Place reclaimed. A godfather who comes back from every mission. A guardian who survives the full moon and still makes breakfast. Both boys are real. Both boys are powerful. One shows how a child can save the world in spite of everything. The other asks what if adults had done right by him sooner, and how much further he could have gone if he hadn't had to heal while he fought the war. And the real test of that difference is coming. When the graveyard calls, which Harry walks in, and which one walks out. The Marauders redeemed. Sirius and Remus as fathers, not ghosts. The graveyard will test Harry, but the men who walk him to that edge, they've already been through their own war. Sirius's story starts with a scream. Godric's hollow. James dead in the hall. Lily on the nursery floor. Harry crying in the cot. Then Azkaban. 13 years of stone, salt and dementors, replaying the night everything changed until grief and guilt are the only language he remembers. By the time he breaks out, he isn't reckless anymore. He's hollowed out. A weapon that doesn't care if it survives the spell it casts. What if that man never had to run? In this timeline, Pettigrew doesn't slip away. The truth comes out in the Shrieking Shack under Veritaserum and One Light, and the world is forced to stare at what really happened. Sirius is cleared before the bitterness finishes eating him alive. He walks out of the ministry not as a fugitive, but as a godfather with a choice to make. He chooses Harry. At first, he's the fun one. Late-night broom races over the paddock. Illegal fire whiskey buttered onto toast when Remus is away. Daring the kids to try a new spell and grinning when they blow up the training dummies. But the edge is still there, the way he flinches at sudden silence. The nights he stands outside Harry's door, staring at it as if daring fate to try again. Harry pulls him back, not with grand speeches, but with small, relentless normality, asking Sirius to sign a permission slip, falling asleep on his shoulder after a Quidditch match, arguing with him about curfew instead of prison breaks. Each ordinary argument cuts through the grief like a knife, carving space for something beyond survival. Remus's healing is quieter but no less radical. He's spent a lifetime as the half-invited guest, useful when Dumbledore needs a spy, dangerous when the moon rises. In this story, that changes. Hermione perfects Wolfsbane for him by 5th year. Sirius forces the Ministry to file the paperwork that lets a werewolf hold steady work. He has a classroom, a salary, a home where the spare room isn't for when he's safe. It's his. He becomes the steady centre. Calls Harry the weapon that lived. Remus calls Harry the weapon that lived. Remus is the one whose voice turns to ice. Their parenting styles clash. Sirius wants Harry and Hermione ready to duel Death Eaters at 15. Remus wants them ready to survive the aftermath. They argue in the kitchen, low and fierce, about how much danger to reveal, how much prophecy to share. Both of them are still carrying James and Lily's deaths, the dead weight of their own failures. They make mistakes. They overprotect, then overcorrect. They let Harry lead missions too early, then forbid him to leave the house. But every time they fracture, they choose to come back to the same table, the same shared promise. The cycle ends here. This is that story. The Marauders' legacy isn't just a map and a trail of bodies. It's a living, breathing family that refuses to hand the next generation the same script of loss. And when the graveyard calls, Harry doesn't walk in alone. He carries 3 lifetimes of love on his back, and the war will feel that difference. Dumbledore's gamble, replayed. Less chess, more trust. But a different kind of war waits in the quiet after the graveyard. Not with wands raised, but with eyes meeting across a desk stacked with secrets. Dumbledore stares at Harry, at Sirius, at Remus. 3 sets of eyes, 3 different claims on the future. The headmaster who once moved children like chess pieces now has to face the consequences of the night everything changed in the Shrieking Shack when Peter didn't escape, when the lie about Sirius died under Veritaserum instead of rotting for 12 more years. It cuts through the grief like a knife, that memory. Because the moment Pettigrew screamed out the truth, Dumbledore's favourite defence shattered. That ignorance could be safer than knowledge. He had argued for Harry's blood wards, for Privet Drive, for a childhood in the dark. And in this story, the injustice is exposed early enough that he cannot pretend it was an unavoidable mistake. So he makes a different choice. The first fracture comes third year, in the hospital wing, when Sirius is cleared and Harry refuses to be sent back to the Dursleys. In canon, Dumbledore smiles and deflects. Here he hesitates, then says the words that change everything, the prophecy. Not all of it, not the exact phrasing, but enough. Enough that Harry knows there is a reason Voldemort keeps reaching for him, that this is not random cruelty but a design born before he could walk. What if Dumbledore decides that shared burden is safer than lonely ignorance? What if, instead of a boy weaponized by half-truths, he chooses a family that understands the battlefield they're walking into? By fifth year, the pattern holds. They meet in Grimmauld Place, not in a dusty office after a year of silence. Dumbledore lays out the Horcrux theory with maps, dates, and the diary as Exhibit A. Sirius paces. Hermione takes notes. Remus asks the questions Dumbledore used to hope no one would think to ask. The result isn't obedience, it's strategy. Harry doesn't just react to curses, he helps plan the hunt, but transparency has edges. Dumbledore is still Dumbledore. He does not hand over Snape's memories, or the full story of that dead-eyed boy who worshipped a Muggleborn and then called her Slur. He does not confess yet that his own death is a piece on the board he intends to sacrifice. He tells Harry that Snape is bound by debt and promise. He does not say that Snape begged for Lily's son to be protected from the very plan now unfolding. The trust is stronger. It is not perfect. Harry feels the gaps. He hears the pauses. There is a night when he stares at the pensive and wonders what else is being kept from him, not out of cruelty but out of fear that the truth will break him before the war can. History will judge this Dumbledore differently. Less puppet master, more partner. Still ruthless when the stakes demand it, still willing to send children into danger. But this time he sits at the table with them, names the danger, and accepts their anger as part of the price. In the end, he remains a man who made terrible choices in a terrible war. The difference is simple and enormous. This time he doesn't carry those choices alone. He shares the burden and lets the next generation decide which spells they're willing to cast in his name. The Weasleys, Hermione, and a wider circle of family. The burrow feels smaller now. Not because it is, but because Harry walks in with a home already at his back. The kitchen is the same chaos of pots and steam and clock hands spinning, but the way Molly Weasley stares at him has changed. She doesn't see a neglected boy in need of rescuing anymore. She sees Sirius's ward, Remus's student, a child already half-claimed by another household in this war. Ron feels it first. In the way Sirius claps Harry on the shoulder and says, "We'll owl you after the order meeting," while Ron is left hovering in the doorway, pretending he doesn't care. In the way Remus lowers his voice when strategy comes up, eyes flicking to the younger Weasleys, to Ginny's clenched jaw, to Fred and George's too bright interest. Ron is happy. Of course he is. Happy that Harry has a godfather who shows up, that there's no cupboard under the stairs in this story, no Dursleys, no night, everything changed, and left him completely alone. But happiness sits beside something jagged, a question he can't quite swallow. If Harry has a real home now, where does that leave Ron Weasley? It comes out one evening in the orchard, wands out, breath white in the air. Spells crack the dusk. Harry's faster, Ron's angrier. Must be nice, Ron snaps after Harry disarms him again. Having them tell you everything. Being in the room. Harry freezes. You think I asked for that? Ron stares at him, chest heaving. You didn't have to. You're Sirius's heir. Remus's project. I'm just... The word deadens on his tongue. I'm just Ron. The silence between them is thick, cut through the grief like a knife. Grief for childhood, for the illusion that they were all equal in this fight. Hermione sees it from another angle. Grimmauld Place is no longer only a headquarters. It is her bedroom, her books on the shelves beside black family grimoires, her cauldron on the table where order maps are spread. What if being loved also means being drafted? Molly corners her one night after a meeting, hands still dusted with flour. You're 15, Molly says, voice shaking. You shouldn't be brewing wolfsbane and debating infiltration plans with grown wizards. Hermione meets her eyes and doesn't look away. If I can brew a potion that keeps Remus safe, how is it responsible not to? That is the fracture line. Molly's parenting is protection through distance. Sirius's is protection through knowledge, through putting a wand in your hand and teaching you exactly which spell might save you. They argue in whispers that still carry. About Ginny, who wants in on defensive drills at Grimmauld. About Fred and George, who already test shield charms behind the broom shed. About Ron, who stands in doorways, excluded from some conversations, dragged into others. Yet the Weasleys never stop being home. Harry still ends up at their table, elbow deep in potatoes, listening to Arthur ramble about plugs while Sirius and Remus trade wary glances with Molly over his head. The Black Townhouse and the Crooked Burrow become two halves of the same refuge, linked by owls, flu powder, and shared secrets. This is that story, a sprawling, messy web of red hair and old magic, of werewolf and animagus, of muggle-born brilliance and hand-me-down jumpers. A family network so tangled that when the war tightens its grip, pulling on one thread moves them all. For the first time, Harry has roots in more than one place. The question is no longer whether he has a home. The question is which home the war will try to burn first. Voldemort's war, slower and smarter routes mean resistance. When Voldemort returns in this world, he doesn't rise into a vacuum of fear and confusion. He rises into a country where Harry Potter has a home, a godfather, a werewolf guardian, and a ministry already singed by earlier truth. What if the Dark Lord comes back to find the board not empty, but crowded with prepared opponents who refuse to look away? The first difference is absence. No Peter Pettigrew. In canon, Wormtail is cowardice weaponized, the rat who will gnaw through any wall if it means his own survival. Here he is dead or kissed, name dragged through public trials and Daily Prophet headlines until there is nothing left to salvage. Voldemort feels that absence like a missing limb. No cringing servant to hunt him down a body. To the Lestrange's hunger for blood. To the Lestrange's hunger for blood. Ambitious, brutal, loyal to the idea of him, but not subtle. These are people who don't hide in walls. They make entrances. They want the world to stare. That changes the shape of the war. Without Peter's careful, terrified resourcefulness, the slow infiltration of institutions is clumsier. The Ministry, already humiliated by the Pettigrew scandal and Fudge's exposed cowardice, is jumpy. Aurors who watched Sirius, cleared and heard under-oath testimony about Death Eaters walking free are on edge. Amelia Bones has dossiers ready. Kingsley has names. Tonks has faces. When masked figures start testing the waters, they meet wards and watch lists instead of stunned disbelief. So the takeover slows. No quiet overnight fall of the Ministry in one perfect coup. Instead, a grinding public struggle. Departments pushed, then pushed back. Laws proposed, then filibustered by an emboldened Wizengamot that remembers how close it came to condemning an innocent man twice. Does that stop the worst atrocities? Not completely, but it distorts them. The Muggle-born Registration Commission doesn't appear full-formed as a bureaucratic machine of terror. It starts as a temporary security measure watered down by hearings where Hermione Granger-Black calmly dissects the logic on record. Each restriction is a fight, not a decree. Some never pass. Hollow out the Ministry from within, as quickly he will bleed it from without. Targeted assassinations, ambushes on Aura patrols, attacks on St. Mungo's, on Diagon Alley, on the Weasley home that has become a symbol of open defiance. Terror as message. You are not safe even with your precious protections. And always he circles the same names. Harry, Sirius, Dumbledore. He remembers the trial where Sirius stared into the camera and called him a coward who hides behind children. He remembers Dumbledore standing in the atrium, wand steady, when the prophet finally printed the word returned. He remembers the boy who will not die, so he tries to break them first. Not through one neat prophecy maneuver, but through attrition, kidnapping attempts, cursed letters, poisoned allies, the kind of grief that should cut through the grief like a knife and leave them hollow. But this is that story, the one where Harry does not stand alone on a Ministry floor, wand shaking, begging adults to believe him. The war burns slower, but it burns in the open. There is less silence. Fewer people can pretend to be neutral when the attacks are on public streets and broadcasting court transcripts. A faster victory might have meant a quieter one. This war is longer, messier, and less invisible. Which means the wizarding world has time to choose, Time to train, time to turn their scattered roots into a network of resistance. The only question now is whether they use it. If the rat never ran. 5 biggest butterfly effects. So, what actually changes when the rat never runs? Start with the law. With Pettigrew alive, bound and screaming under Veritaserum, the Ministry can't hide behind convenient corpses and old headlines. The trial is public. The transcripts leak. The photograph of Peter's missing finger, of Sirius's hollowed face in Azkaban, circulates until even the Daily Prophet has to print the word they've avoided for 12 years. Wrong. Fudge's authority cracks. Dumbledore's quiet, patient pressure stops being a warning from the fringe and becomes the only thing keeping the whole system from collapsing. Sirius is exonerated. Not years too late, not posthumously, now. He walks out of the courtroom to blinding flashes and a world that has to admit it was wrong about him, wrong about Azkaban, wrong about the boy it left on a Muggle doorstep. This is that story. The one where the Ministry's embarrassment becomes policy. Emergency reviews, new oversight, a grudging agreement that maybe, just maybe, Dumbledore should be listened to when he says Voldemort is not dead. Then there's home. Canon Harry survives despite having nothing. This Harry goes home to Grimmauld Place, to Remus in threadbare jumpers and Sirius burning old black family heirlooms in the fireplace. The cupboard under the stairs is replaced by a bedroom with a real door that locks from the inside. Duels in the drawing room, essays at the kitchen table, arguments about ethics and power that cut through the grief like a knife. He still has the scar, the prophecy, the war, but he also has someone to steady his wand hand and say, again, when the Patronus flickers. Question Snape, to push back on Fudge, to question Snape, to push back on Fudge, to stand in front of a class and teach a shield charm because he's been doing this since he was 12. And the war itself? Without Pettigrew, Voldemort's return is delayed, distorted, or forced through uglier channels. There's no loyal servant brewing potions in a ramshackle house, no hand freely given. Some other fanatic might step forward, but by then, the Order is already mobilized. Dumbledore never has to waste years fighting denial. Hogwarts doesn't drift toward being a battlefield caught off guard. It is fortified on purpose. Wards layered on wards. Students drilled in evacuation drills and defensive formations. The castle becomes a fortress, not a casualty. Emotionally, the board is rearranged. Sirius lives. So does Lupin, backed by Wolfsbane, and a family that refuses to let him disappear between moons. The grief in Harry's life shifts shape. He still loses people. This is still a war. But the pattern is different. Fewer father figures ripped away just as he learns to trust them. More adults who survive long enough to see him grow into the weapon they helped forge. All of it traces back to one room, one choice. The Shrieking Shack. The night everything changed and a single spell that held a rat in place and refused to let the past run away again. What if that was the moment that rewrote the fate of a world? In this timeline, it is. Would this Harry still be a hero? So if the rat never runs, if the war bends in that one cramped room, who does that make Harry Potter? Still a hero or something else entirely? Because here's the uncomfortable question sitting under this whole story. Does heroism require trauma? Is Canon Harry's greatness inseparable from the cupboard, the neglect, the years of being screamed at and treated as less than human? Or is that just the kind of story we've been trained to accept? The boy who's only worthy because he survived being broken first? In this timeline, the night everything changed doesn't end with Harry watching Sirius dragged away. It ends with Sirius and Remus walking out of the Shrieking Shack beside him. No Dementors, no soul-deep despair, no Ministry calling him a liar. The spell that held Pettigrew in place doesn't just cut through the grief like a knife, it severs the narrative that Harry must be alone to be brave. So what if his courage grows in a different soil? He still faces a prophecy. He still walks into a war. Voldemort is not dead, only delayed, reshaped, forced to claw his way back through different servants and darker rituals. But this Harry isn't charging forward to prove he matters to a world that threw him away. He's defending a home he actually loves, a godfather who cooks him breakfast, a werewolf who teaches him to breathe through panic, not bury it. His choices shift. In fourth year, when the whispers of Voldemort's return start again, he doesn't stumble through it blind and isolated. Sirius and Remus are already mapping Death Eater movements, already dragging old Order members out of retirement. Dumbledore isn't the only strategist on the board. When Harry offers himself up, it's not reckless martyrdom. It's a calculated sacrifice, weighed against plans, contingencies, escape routes. He still steps into danger. He just doesn't have to do it from a place of believing his own life is disposable. Information changes everything. Imagine him walking into the graveyard with occlumency he actually mastered because Snape was forced years earlier to teach him under supervision. Imagine a 15-year-old who's been told the full truth about Horcruxes before they explode his life, who chooses to hunt them with adults at his side instead of sneaking out under cover of silence and guilt. And there's another layer here. Us. The readers. The viewers. There's a reason this what-if hits so hard. There is a fierce, almost aching catharsis in watching adults finally do right by the child the story has hurt so much. In seeing a world that failed him in Canon Scramble too late to make amends, and in this version, actually succeed. So which Harry do you find more compelling? The boy forged in neglect, or the one tempered by love and still walking into the same war? And what does that choice say about the stories we've been given, and the ones we're still desperate enough to rewrite that will follow him into a darker possibility next? From what if to what next? Imagining your own AU. So if that's the question, if this is the choice, then the next step is yours. Because this is that story, but it doesn't have to end where we stopped. Close your eyes for a second and walk past the big battles. Past the Ministry atrium, past the graveyard, past the headlines. What if you focused on the small rooms instead? The kitchen at Grimmauld Place, a cramped Gryffindor dorm, a quiet corner of the Hogwarts grounds in winter. Harry's first Christmas with Sirius and Remus is not a spectacle. It's a scraped-together tree that leans a bit to the left. Remus's careful spell to make paper stars drift in slow circles. Sirius pretending he's not watching Harry's face like it's the only thing keeping him alive. There are no Dursleys here. No cold silence. Just a boy who doesn't flinch when someone reaches for their wand near him because he trusts the hands holding it. His first detention as the son of a marauder is different too. McGonagall's mouth is thin. Her eyes are not. She stares at him over her glasses and sees James's recklessness, Lily's defiance, Sirius's temper, Remus's wounded restraint. Does she punish the prank harder because the war is coming, because she's seen what careless magic can do? Or does she keep him after, ask him in a low voice what Sirius is teaching him, what Dumbledore isn't? And his first real birthday party. Not Dudley's leftovers, not a cake Hagrid smuggled in. A crowded sitting room. Hermione arguing with Sirius about house elf laws, Ron pretending not to be impressed by the enchanted fireworks in the fireplace, Remus in the doorway feeling the grief for James and Lily, cut through the grief like a knife, and still choosing to stay in the room, to stay in the story. Those are the moments you can claim. But it goes further. How does Draco Malfoy walk through this altered war? If Sirius Black is a public rehabilitated Black heir, if the House of Black is no longer a dead relic but a political weapon turned against Voldemort, does Draco hesitate sooner? Does he watch Harry duel in Dueling Club and wonder whether the adults who raised him have lied about everything? Where does that leave Luna, seeing spectres no one else will name? Neville, growing under professors who are openly training children for conflict instead of pretending peace will hold? The scars of this different war will mark them too. Different names on the memorials. Different laws written in the Ministry decades later by kids who once screamed in the corridors during midnight raids. If you write, draw, or dive into meta, this AU is a sandbox. Imagine a Snape-Sirius confrontation over Harry's training. Snape spitting out that he won't send another child to die for someone else's prophecy. Picture Remus and McGonagall sharing tea in the staff room, trading lesson plans and contingency spells, quietly admitting they are preparing children for a battlefield they might not survive. In the end, this isn't a definitive answer. It's a what-if. A place to test Canon's choices, to imagine futures that are kinder, stranger, or far more dangerous. The war is still coming. The question is, in your version, who walks into it, and who walks back out? Rewinding one last time. Back to the Shrieking Shack. So we go back, before the trials, before the training schedules on Grimauld's kitchen table, before a different war carved different scars into the same faces. Back to the Shrieking Shack. Dust hangs in the air, glowing in the one light. The floorboards complain with every breath. Harry's heart is hammering so loudly he's sure everyone can hear it. Sirius and Snape are both screaming, wands raised, old hatred crackling between them. Peter is mid-transformation, fur sliding back into skin, whiskers into a trembling, pointed face, and Remus moves first. Petrificus totalis! The spell hits Peter in the middle of his scuttle toward the door. He freezes, one paw hand outstretched, mouth open in a soundless plea. That's it. That is the night everything changed. From there, everything else is consequence. Flash, Fudge in a packed courtroom, staring in horror as a bound Peter under Veritaserum describes Voldemort, the Fidelius, the street of dead muggles he staged to frame Sirius. Flash. Dumbledore's gaze, sharp and tired as he uses that confession to cut through the grief like a knife and force the Ministry to reopen old files. Flash. Privet drives front door, Petunia's thin mouth pressed tight as she signs custody papers, and Harry steps away from that house forever. Flash. Remus in the Grimmauld Place drawing room, calmly correcting Harry's stance as Sirius barks instructions and Hermione's spell shatters a target dummy. Flash. No graveyard cauldron with a cringing rat. A different ritual, slower, uglier. Voldemort clawing his way back with help from other Death Eaters, because the servant who should have saved him is locked in Azkaban. It all flows from that one choice in the shack, but how fragile is it really? What if Remus had hesitated half a second longer? What if Harry's fear for Sirius had boiled over into a killing curse instead of a binding spell? What if Snape, drowning in his own grudges, had stunned Sirius first and dragged him back to the Dementors before Peter could speak? This is that story. The version where fear is slower than love, where trust outruns old betrayal by the width of a wand tip. For the Marauders, that frozen rat on the floor is a pivot between two lives. On one side, betrayal, Azkaban, years of silence where laughter used to be. On the other, a second chance at family. Sirius cleared. Remus believed. Harry and Hermione learning the truth from the people who lived it, not from whispered rumours and Daily Prophet headlines. Their whole arc bends because this time they refuse to let the rat run. Years later, in memory, Harry stands in the shack again. Older. Tired. The war is mostly over. The dead are names he carries on his tongue. He stares at the place on the floor where Peter fell. The dust is undisturbed now. No screaming, no spell still humming in the air. He realizes his life split right there along the line of a single spell cast in time, and he can't help asking, if that wand had wavered, who would he have become instead? If you'd stay in this timeline a little longer. He stands in that dusty room and understands. This is where the story forked. One spell held true. One rat didn't run. And from that single stubborn moment, an entire war rewrote itself. That's the journey you've just walked through. One prevented escape turned a hunted fugitive into a cleared godfather. Sirius Black did not rot in a cell. He signed custody papers. Remus Lupin did not vanish into shabby guest rooms and substitute posts. He came home every night to a kitchen table crowded with books and arguments. Harry Potter did not go back to a cupboard. He went back to a real home. From there, everything else followed. The trial that cut through the grief like a knife. Cornelius Fudge stumbling through press conferences as Peter Pettigrew's confession shattered his easy narrative. Dumbledore forced to bargain with truth instead of secrets, staring over his half-moon glasses at a boy who now had adults ready to fight for him. The Ministry could not pretend the dead were just names on plaques, not when the traitor sat in chains before them. And because the rat never reached that graveyard, the resurrection we knew twisted into something harsher and earlier. No quiet tournament ambush, no isolated grave. Instead, a desperate Dark Lord clawing his way back through other servants, other spells, forcing the Order to rise years ahead of schedule. This war did not wait for Harry to grow up. It came for him while he was still learning who he was, only this time he met it with family at his back. That's the emotional heart of this timeline. What if Harry's story wasn't survival horror in a cupboard, but a found family war epic? What if love and relentless support didn't make him softer, only sharper? The prophecy still whispered. The dead were still dead. The grief still screamed in quiet hours. But every battle, from the first Patronus lesson to the last stand at Hogwarts, was fought by a boy who knew beyond doubt that going home was not a dream. It was a promise. So now it's your turn. In this version of events, what was the moment that hit you hardest? Was it the night everything changed in the Shrieking Shack, when the spell held and Peter fell? The first time Harry walked into Grimmauld Place and realised his room was already waiting for him? Or is there one canon scene you're burning to see rewritten with this Harry? Supported, trained and furious, standing in it instead? Tell that story in the comments. Name the choice, the duel, the whispered conversation you'd reshape in this universe. If you want more timelines where a single decision rewires the war, check out the other What If deep dives on this channel. Subscribe so you don't miss the next fracture point, and share this with the Potter fans who still lie awake wondering how different it all could have been. Because in this world, the night the rat didn't run became the night everything changed. The war that followed was bloodier, clearer, and the boy at its centre finally got to go home before he had to save the world.